Welcome to Omni-Wizard. Today's adventure. What if Harry Potter became an Omni-King and the goddesses of Marvel and DC knelt before him? If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. The Threshold of Crowns. There is a particular hour, known to no clock and recorded in no almanac, when the universe pauses to take inventory of itself, when the great accountants of causality look up from their ledgers like the tips of their cosmic pencils, and discover, with the mild administrative alarm of a clerk who has found an extra zero where no zero ought to be, that one of their numbers has begun to grow. It was during precisely such an hour, in a corner of the cosmos that had until very recently believed itself unremarkable, that Harry Potter stopped being a wizard and started being something for which the dictionaries of 7,000 civilizations had not yet bothered to coin a word. He had not asked for this. That detail, the narrator wishes to note at the outset, will matter a great deal later, when certain ambitious parties attempt to argue that he had schemed his way to the summit of all things. For the truth, plainer and stranger, was that Harry had simply kept surviving until survival itself ran out of competitors. Death had come for him before, you understand, and gone away again, and the second time it went away it left the door open, and through that open door poured a quantity of authority so vast that lesser men would have been pulped by the mere draught of it. Harry did not pulp. Harry instead stood up, dusted the ash of a finished war off his sleeves, and regarded the new architecture of his own being with the expression of a man who has been handed an absurdly oversized hat, and intends to wear it with dignity precisely because it is absurd. The hat in this metaphor was the multiverse. It happened, as the largest things so often do, in the smallest possible room. The room was the broken nave of a chapel on the outskirts of nowhere in particular, a place that had once been Godric's Hollow and had since become merely the coordinate where a story chose to end. The roof had surrendered to time. The pews had surrendered to fire. And Tom Riddle, who had spent the better part of a century surrendering to nothing, knelt in the rubble with the last of his stolen years draining out of him like wine from a cracked amphora, and discovered that the boy he had hunted across decades had grown into something that did not require hunting, because it could not be cornered, because it now contained the very concept of corners. "You feel it," Tom said. His voice had lost its theatrical hiss. What remained was thinner, almost curious, the tone of a scholar confronted with a proof that demolished his life's work. "Whatever it is, you feel it filling you." "I do," Harry agreed. He was not gloating. This is worth dwelling upon because every prior confrontation between these two had been a contest of cruelties, and a reader steeped in that history might reasonably expect the victor to indulge in a little well-earned venom. Harry indulged in none. He looked at the dying man with something the universe, watching, would later struggle to classify, and which it eventually filed under the unsatisfactory heading of mercy, for lack of a grander word. He crouched so that his eyes were level with Tom's, and the rubble beneath his boots rearranged itself into a comfortable surface without being asked, the way furniture in the homes of the very powerful has a habit of anticipating its master. "You spent your whole life," Harry said, "trying to become something that could not die, and here, at the end, you're dying anyway, and I'm the thing you were trying to become." He tilted his head. "It's almost funny. I think in a few thousand years I'll find it funny. Right now I just find it sad." "Then end it," Tom rasped. "If you become a god, then act like one, smite me." And here the narrator must report a small marvel, because Harry did the one thing no version of this confrontation had ever contained. He reached out and he laid his palm against the dying man's forehead, and he did not smite. He did something far more unforgivable from Tom Riddle's perspective. He forgave. Not in words. Harry had grown past the need for words to carry his largest meanings, but in the simple transmission of a fact, poured directly from the new ocean of his being into the guttering candle of Tom's. "You were afraid, and your fear ate you, and I am sorry that no one taught you another way to be." Tom Riddle died with that knowledge sitting in him like a swallowed coal, and whether it burned or warmed him on the way out is a question the narrator declines to answer, partly out of tact and partly because not even the new god could say for certain. The body became dust. The dust became part of the floor. The floor, sensing that the story had moved on, quietly forgot it had ever been a battlefield. And Harry Potter stood alone in the ruins of the last small thing he would ever do, and lifted his face to a hole in the roof through which he could see not the sky of his own world but, layered behind it like the pages of an impossibly thick book held up to a lamp, all the other skies, every sky, the amber dusk of worlds that orbited dying suns, the screaming aurora of worlds where magic was the weather. The flat white nothing of the spaces between, where reality thinned to rumor. He saw them not as a man sees a painting, but as a reader sees a sentence all at once, meaning intact, each world a clause in a paragraph he could, if he chose, revise. He chose for the moment not to revise anything. He simply looked and let the looking fill him, and the universe watching this relaxed by a fraction, for it had been bracing, the way the cosmos always braces when raw power floods into a vessel, for the vessel to start grasping. Grasping is the universal first symptom. The newly omnipotent invariably begin by seizing, by reordering, by smiting, by erecting monuments to their own enlargement, and the universe had long ago resigned itself to the tedious cleanup that follows. But Harry did not grasp. Harry put his hands in his pockets. It is a small gesture. The narrator wishes to assure you that it was noticed at the highest levels. Far from the broken chapel, though far is a word that had begun around Harry to lose its meaning, the way temperature loses its meaning at the heart of a star, there existed a place where endings were filed. It did not look like an office, though it functioned as one. It looked, depending on who was doing the looking and how recently they had themselves ended, like a quiet garden at the blue hour, or a kitchen with the kettle just off the boil, or a long shoreline where the tide had gone out and left the sand smooth enough to write on. To the entity who tended it, it looked like home, and she had tended it for longer than the concept of length had existed, and in all that immeasurable tenure she had never once been surprised. She was surprised now. She set down the thing she had been holding. It is not for the narrator to say what it was, save that it was small and warm and had recently been a great many lives, and she turned her face toward the disturbance, and she smiled the way one smiles at a sound from a room one had thought was empty. The disturbance was Harry. The disturbance was a new gravity in the architecture of all things, a fresh weight bending the lines of fate toward a single point, and she, who had collected every soul that had ever finished its business and would collect every soul still to come, recognized in that weight a thing she had waited for without admitting, even to herself, that she was waiting. "Well," said the lady at the end of things to no one in the fond tone of a woman whose long-expected guest has finally knocked. "There you are." She did not announce herself in thunder. The newly powerful in the narrator's wide experience almost always announced themselves in thunder, and she had buried every one of them, and she had no intention of behaving like the buried. She walked instead. She walked out of the place where endings were filed and into the broken chapel by the simple expedient of deciding that the two places were, for the duration of a conversation, adjacent, and she found the new god of all things standing in the rubble with his hands in his pockets, looking up through a hole in the roof at every sky that had ever been. And she liked him immediately, which had not happened in an interval of time best expressed in the lifespans of galaxies. "You're not grasping," she observed. She had a low voice, unhurried, the voice of someone who has never in her existence needed to repeat herself. "Everyone grasps the first thing, always. They get the power and they clutch at it like a drowning man clutches a rope." She came to stand beside him, and she too looked up at the skies companionably, two people at a railing watching a view. "You've got your hands in your pockets. There's nothing to grab," Harry said. "It's already mine. Grabbing would just be—" He searched briefly for the word, and the search took him across 9 languages that did not yet exist. "Fidgeting." The lady laughed. It was a genuine laugh, and it cost the local region of spacetime a certain amount of structural confidence, because her genuine laughter was not a thing the cosmos was built to bear, and a few of the dimmer stars overhead winked out in startlement before remembering themselves and winking back on. "Fidgeting," she repeated, delighted. "Oh, I am going to enjoy you. Do you know who I am?" "You're the one who keeps opening doors for me," Harry said, and turned at last to look at her directly, and the narrator must here report that even a being newly furnished with authority over all creation found in the lady's face something that made him glad of his hands' employment in his pockets, for hands, faced with such a face, want to do foolish reaching things. "Twice now, maybe more. I've lost count of how many times I should have died." He considered her. "Your death." "I'm an aspect of it," she said, with the modesty of the genuinely vast. "Death is a large idea. I'm the face it wears when it comes for someone it likes. Most never see this one." She studied him with frank, ancient curiosity, a curator examining an acquisition she had not expected to make in her lifetime, save that she had no lifetime, only an endless middle. "You've grown into something the multiverse doesn't have a slot for, Harry. There are powers out there, old powers, proud powers, powers who have ruled their corners since before your world's sun condensed out of dust, and within the hour every one of them is going to feel what I'm feeling right now, that you've arrived, that the board has a new king on it." She paused. "Some of them will want to bow, more of them will want to test you. A few of them will want to end you, which, I should warn you, is now technically my jurisdiction, and I take a dim view of trespass." "And you?" Harry asked. "Which do you want?" It was, the narrator observes, an impertinent question to put to the personification of mortality. The lady at the end of things had been asked many things across the unspooling of forever, for more time, chiefly for mercy, for explanations she did not owe and did not give, but she had not, in living memory or dead, been asked what she wanted, because it had never occurred to anyone that she might want. She tilted her head. Something moved behind her eyes that the cosmos, leaning in, would have given a great deal to read. "Ask me again," she said softly, "when you've met the others. When you've seen what they offer and what they cost and how they kneel, because they will kneel, the proud ones especially, and you'll learn very quickly that a kneel can be a gift or a trap or a weapon, and sometimes all three wearing the same crown." She reached out then, and the cosmos held its breath, and she did nothing more scandalous than straighten the collar of his ruined shirt, a small domestic correction, the gesture of someone laying claim to the right to make such corrections in the future. "Ask me again when you understand the difference. I'll still be here. I'm always still here. It's rather the whole point of me." And she stepped back into the place where endings were filed, and the broken chapel was just a broken chapel again, and Harry Potter stood alone with a straightened collar, and the dawning understanding that omnipotence, far from simplifying his life, had just complicated it along several axes he did not previously possess. He found that he was, against all reasonable expectation, smiling. The narrator must now pull back, the way a camera pulls back from a single lit window to reveal the whole dark city, because the events of the broken chapel were merely the local symptom of a derangement that had begun, in that inventory-taking hour, to propagate outward through the body of all reality. Power of Harry's new magnitude does not stay put. It radiates. And across the layered skies he had so recently surveyed, in throne rooms and temples and the cold cathedrals of deep space, beings of enormous consequence stirred from contemplations that had lasted eons, lifted their heads like deer at the snap of a far-off twig, and asked the universe, each in their own idiom, the same essentially territorial question. What is that, and why is it bigger than me? On a hidden island ringed by a sea that obeyed older laws than physics, a woman who had been sculpted from clay and quickened by the breath of goddesses set down the spear she had been sharpening. She sharpened it not from need but from discipline, the way the truly dangerous keep their edges keen against a day that may never come, and rose from her seat and walked to the cliff's edge, and felt upon her face a wind that carried no scent of her own ocean. It carried instead the scent of every ocean. Diana of Themyscira had stood in the presence of gods. She had argued with them, fought beside them, and on one memorable occasion thrown one of them into the sea. She knew the particular pressure divinity exerts on the air around it, the way true power makes the world lean. What she felt now was not a god leaning on the world. It was the world leaning on something else, something new, something that from where she stood had no business existing. "Mother," she said, though her mother was not present, the word a reflex of childhood that surfaces in even the mightiest at the edge of the unknown. Then, recovering to the wind itself, "I will find you. And I will measure you, and the gods help you if your measure is found wanting." She did not yet know his name. She would learn it soon enough, and learn also that measuring him was rather like measuring the tide with a ruler, technically possible, in that you could note where the water reached, but missing, fundamentally, the point of the tide. In the golden shadow halls of a realm where the dead outnumbered the living 1,000-fold, a woman crowned in the curving antlers of a beast that had never breath turned from the throne she had spent ages coveting and would, given time, have certainly seized, and laughed, a low, delighted, predatory laugh, the laugh of a gambler who has just watched the stakes on the table triple. Hela, who styled herself the goddess of death and resented bitterly that the title was, cosmologically speaking, an exaggeration, recognized the new weight in the multiverse for exactly what it was, an opportunity. A king, she purred to the legions of green-flamed warriors who answered her every whim and to whom she never once explained herself. A real one at last, not a strutting Asgardian, not a skyfather in his dotage. A king with the whole of everything in his pocket. Her eyes, when she said pocket, took on a covetous gleam, for Hela had spent her existence reaching for thrones that other people insisted on sitting in, and the notion of a throne that contained all other thrones was, to her, very nearly indecent in its appeal. "Saddle the death wolves," she told her captains. "I am going courting." Whether she meant courtship or conquest, even she could not at that moment have said, and the narrator suspects she enjoyed the ambiguity, as she enjoyed all weapons that could be carried openly without anyone being certain they were weapons. On a third world, beneath a sky she personally maintained, a woman with hair like a captured storm cloud stood in the center of a circle of kneeling supplicants and felt the prayer in her own chest stutter. Aurora Munro had been worshipped before. She found it uncomfortable and had never quite cured her people of the habit. The rains came when she called them. The lightning answered her open hand, and a population that has watched you end a drought with a gesture will not be talked out of building you a temple. But she had always known the limit of her own divinity, that she was a woman with a gift, magnified by belief into something that looked, from below, like a goddess. She had never confused the costume for the body inside it. So when the new weight settled over the multiverse, when she felt for the first time the presence of something that was not a magnified woman but an actual sovereign of the actual cosmos, she did something her supplicants had never seen her do. She lowered her hand, she let the gathered storm dissolve unspent, and she said quietly to the suddenly nervous faces around her, "Rise, all of you. I will not be knelt to today." For she had recognized in that arriving weight the difference between a borrowed crown and a real one, and the recognition had made her own borrowed crown sit heavy and false upon her brow, and she resolved then and there to go and look upon the genuine article, if only to know at last what she had spent her life imitating. The narrator could continue. There were others, an eternal in a museum, who felt the new presence and immediately wanted to understand its aesthetics. A sorceress on a stage in a city of mortals who felt it and dropped, for the only time in her professional life, the deck of cards she was holding, but the pattern the narrator trusts is established. All across the layered skies, the most formidable women in creation lifted their heads at once and turned, as if by some prior arrangement none of them had made, toward a single point in the broken middle of an unremarkable world. And the point, blissfully unaware of the convergence it had triggered, was at that moment sitting on a fallen beam in the ruins of a chapel, having conjured himself a cup of tea, wondering whether omnipotence came with any obligation to do something about the weather which had turned, while he was distracted by the death of his oldest enemy, to a fine and persistent rain. He drank the tea. It was, he found, exactly the temperature he wanted, which was unsurprising, since temperature was now among the very many things he wanted and received in the same instant. This pleased him less than you might think. There is a specific melancholy that attends the collapse of the gap between desire and fulfillment, a melancholy known to lottery winners and certain emperors, and Harry, sipping tea that could not possibly disappoint him, felt the first faint draught of it and resolved to keep an eye on the feeling, the way a sailor keeps an eye on a cloud that is presently small. He had begun in the quiet to take a kind of inventory of himself, and the inventory was educational. He could feel the worlds. Not as data, he had feared at first that omniscience would arrive as an unending stream of information, every sparrow's fall and every supernova reported simultaneously, and that he would go mad inside the first second. It did not arrive that way. It arrived the way a fluent reader holds a familiar book. He was not conscious of every letter, but every letter was available to him, and meaning rose to his attention precisely when he turned his attention toward it. He could, if he wished, attend to a single child crying in a single tenement on a world whose son he had never named, and know the child's grief entire and soothe it with a thought. He found, testing this, that he could. He found, testing further, that the temptation to do it everywhere, all at once, forever, was a real and pulling temptation, and that yielding to it would erase him, would spread the butter of his selfhood so thin across the bread of all creation that nothing recognizably Harry would remain. He set the cup down. He had glimpsed in that pull the shape of the trap, and the shape of the trap was kindness without limit, and he understood that he would have to learn restraint not in cruelty, which had never tempted him, but in mercy, which always had. This is the secret of him, and the narrator surrenders it now rather than hoarding it for a later chapter, because the whole of what follows depends upon it. Harry Potter's flaw, the crack through which everything dangerous would eventually try to enter, was that he cared too much and had just been handed the means to act on all of it. A cruel god is a straightforward problem. The cosmos has machinery for cruel gods, much of it sharpened and waiting. A kind one is a subtler catastrophe, and the cosmos, leaning close, did not yet know whether to be relieved or afraid. He rose from the beam. The rain, he decided, could stay. People were fond of their weather, and a god who began his reign by abolishing rain would set a poor precedent for the abolishing of larger things. But he was finished, he felt, with this particular ruin, and with the smallness of the world that contained it, not from contempt but from the simple outgrowing that any creature does when its shell no longer fits. He looked up once more through the broken roof at the layered skies, and this time he did not merely look. This time he stepped. The narrator lacks the vocabulary to describe a step that crosses from a single world into the standing place above all worlds, and suspects no vocabulary would suffice, since the experience has no analog in the lives of readers, who step from rooms into hallways and at most from countries into other countries. But the attempt must be made so. Imagine that you have lived your whole life inside a single painting, believing the painting to be the world, and that you have now stepped out of the frame and turned around and seen the painting hanging on a wall, and seen the wall, and seen that the wall is one of millions in a gallery without end, and seen that you're standing in the gallery, and that the gallery has been, all along, the place you were actually from. Harry stepped, and the chapel and its world dwindled behind him into a single bright frame among uncountable frames, and he stood in the gallery of all things, and he understood that this was his house now, and that it had been built by hands he could not see to his exact measure and had been standing empty waiting for a very long time. In the gallery there was a chair. It is important that the narrator be precise about the chair, because a great many subsequent misunderstandings, wars, and at least one marriage proposal would hinge on the question of the chair, and the propagandists of various factions would later describe it variously as a throne of skulls, a throne of light, a throne grown from the bones of slain rivals, and a throne that did not exist at all, and had been invented by Harry's enemies to make him seem grand. The truth is duller and stranger than any of these. The chair was a chair. It was in fact recognizably an armchair of the comfortable and slightly shabby English variety, the sort of chair that has a permanent dent shaped like its owner and a faint smell of old books, and it sat in the middle of the gallery of all things as though someone had carried it up from a sitting room and set it down and forgotten to take it away. Harry looked at it for a long moment. He understood without being told that the gallery had made it, that the standing place above all worlds given a sovereign at last had reached into that sovereign's idea of comfort and built him the seat he would actually want, rather than the seat that power was supposed to want. And he laughed alone in the house of all things because the universe had just paid him a compliment so intimate and so accurate that it embarrassed him. He sat down. The chair received him with the contented creak of a chair that has been waiting to be sat in. From it the layered skies were visible in every direction at once, near and far made meaningless, and Harry sat in his shabby armchair at the center of everything and put his feet up on a footstool the gallery had thoughtfully provided and said aloud to the watching cosmos, "All right, let's see who comes to visit." The first to come was not a goddess. The first to come was a herald, and the narrator introduces him chiefly to establish a contrast, the way a portraitist lays down a dull background to make the subject sing. He arrived in the gallery with a great deal more ceremony than the lady at the end of things had bothered with, announcing himself in a fanfare of trumpets that had no players, scattering roselight across the frames of 1,000 worlds, generally behaving like a man who has been told his entrance matters and has believed it. He was tall and beautiful in the bland, assembled way of beings who have designed themselves, and he wore authority like a borrowed coat a size too large, and he bowed to Harry with a flourish that managed to be both elaborate and faintly insulting, the way the truly arrogant bow. "Sovereign of the new weight," the herald intoned. "I come bearing the regards of my master, the Lord Sovrano, who rules the concordance of the 8th sphere, and who extends to you, in your novelty, the courtesy of a warning, that you might be spared the embarrassment of ignorance." He paused, the better to enjoy his own diction. There can be only one apex to creation. My master has held that apex since before your kind learned to bury its dead. He bids me ask, will you bend the knee to the established order and take your place beneath him as a vassal power? Or will you require, and here the herald's smile sharpened into something with teeth behind it, correction? Harry in his armchair listened to all of this with the patient, slightly fond attention of a man hearing out a child's elaborate explanation of why bedtime should be later. When the herald had finished, Harry was quiet for a moment, considering. Then he said, "What's your name?" The herald blinked. It was not the response his script had anticipated. "I am the voice of Sovrano." "No," Harry said gently. "That's your job. What's your name? The one your mother used. You had one before your master assembled you into a coat-rack for his ego. I can see it. I'm asking because I'd like you to hear it said by someone who isn't about to give you an order." The gallery was very quiet. The herald's beautiful face did something it had not done in a long time, which was waver. And Harry, watching the waver, said the name. A small name, a soft and ordinary name, the name of a person who had existed once before Lord Sovrano found him and pared away every part of him that was not useful. And the herald, hearing it, stood absolutely still in the house of all things, and for the duration of one held breath was not a herald at all, but only the person the name belonged to, blinking up at a sky full of skies. Remembering that he had once been small and frightened and someone's child. "Go home," Harry said. "Tell your master I'm not coming to him and he's welcome to come to me, and that I'd much rather we had tea than a war." And he leaned forward in the shabby armchair and the layered skies leaned with him. "Tell him I gave you your name back. He'll understand the threat in that better than any I could make with fire." The herald went. He did not bow on the way out. He had, the narrator is pleased to report, forgotten how, and would spend a not inconsiderable span of subsequent time relearning a great many things he had been assembled to do without. And whether this proved a kindness or a cruelty is one of those questions Harry left scattered behind him like seeds, trusting the future to sort the flowers from the weeds. When the gallery was empty again, Harry settled back into his chair. He had learned something from the exchange, and he turned the lesson over. That his power applied to a soul did not have to break it to be terrible, that the gentlest possible use of omnipotence, the mere return of a stolen name, could be more devastating than any smiting, and that this was a weapon he would have to wield with enormous care, because a man who can unmake your defenses with kindness is a far more frightening thing than a man who can merely unmake you. He had frightened the herald not by threatening him but by seeing him. He held the knowledge openly in the front of his mind where it could keep him honest, which is a harder thing than tucking it away. Lord Sovrano, the narrator should mention, was not a fiction the herald had invented and would matter later, and was at that very moment receiving his returned and renamed servant with the cold displeasure of a tyrant who has sent out a knife and received back a flower. But that is a thread for a future chapter. For now it is enough to know that the first power to test the new king had tested him with arrogance and been answered with mercy, and had come away more shaken than any blow could have left it. It was after the herald had gone, in the long, settling quiet of the gallery, that Harry first noticed the wrongness at the edge of things. He had been amusing himself, if amusing is the word for the recreations of a god, and the narrator concedes it may not be, by reading the layered skies the way a man on a lazy afternoon reads a hedgerow, attending to one bright life and then another, a coronation here, a first kiss there, a war ending and a war beginning in two frames hung side by side in a juxtaposition that gave the gallery a sense of irony. He found that he could love them all at once without drowning, provided he loved them the way one loves a city rather than the way one loves a person, in aggregate, with affection for the whole and a willingness to be surprised by the particular. And he was, in this manner, surveying the immense and crowded wall of creation when he became aware that one corner of it was darker than the rest. Not dark as night is dark. Night, after all, is full of stars, of sleeping things, of the patient machinery of dawn. This was dark as a missing tooth is dark, an absence where presence ought to be, a place on the wall of all worlds where several frames simply were not, and where the frames adjacent to the gap had begun, very slightly, to curl at their edges, the way paper curls when something has been holding a flame a careful distance away. Harry turned the full weight of his attention toward the gap, and the gap, he discovered, did not welcome attention. It declined to be read. Where every other corner of creation opened to him like a sentence in his mother tongue, this corner met him with the flat refusal of a sealed door, and worse, the narrator reports this with some reluctance. The better to honor the chill of it, the door was warm to the touch of his mind, and the warmth was the warmth of something digesting. "What are you?" Harry said, not as a herald says it, with menace, but as a physician says it, bending to a symptom. The gap did not answer in words. It answered instead by widening, not greatly, not enough to alarm a less attentive sovereign, but enough that one further frame at its rim went pale and thin and then, with a sound like a held breath finally released, ceased. A world ended. Not the death of a world, which is a loud and grieving thing full of last poems and final embraces, an entire world simply discontinued, its billions of lives revised out of the manuscript of being so cleanly that the worlds on either side did not so much as notice the seam where their neighbor had been. And Harry, who could feel every life in creation and had just felt a great many of them stop without struggle, without prayer, without even the dignity of fear, rose from his shabby armchair for the first time since he had sat in it. He did not, the narrator notes, rush to the gap. A lesser power would have rushed, would have flung itself across the gallery in a fury of intervention, and would have learned too late that the gap fed on exactly that. Harry stood at his chair and held his ground and looked at the warm, dark absence eating slowly inward from the edge of everything, and he understood three things in quick and sobering succession. He understood that there existed, in his new kingdom, a thing he could not read and could not love and could not, with a thought, soothe. He understood that it had been eating long before he arrived, patiently, from the rim inward, and that no one, not Sovrano in his concordance, not the proud goddesses lifting their heads across the skies, had thought to mention it, which meant either that they did not know or that they had agreed, in the way the powerful agree to ignore the leak in the cellar while they quarrel over the furniture upstairs, not to look. And he understood, with the particular clarity that had come to him along with the rest of his new estate, that whatever else his reign was going to be, courtship or war, mercy or the slow, stupid mortal winning the lady had asked of him, it was going to have at its center the problem of the warm dark that ate worlds without grief and could not be reasoned with, because reason requires a listener, and the gap was all mouth. He sat back down. He did it deliberately, the way a man sits back down in a burning building to prove to his own racing pulse that he has time to think. The gap could wait an hour. The gap, he judged, had waited eons. It was in no hurry, which was the most frightening thing about it. And there was a goddess crossing the sea between worlds with a spear in her hand, and the lady had asked him to win her the slow way, the way that could fail, and Harry found, settling once more into the dent the chair had made for him, that he was almost grateful for the warm dark at the edge of everything. Because a king with an armchair and infinite power and nothing to fear is a comedy, and a king with all of that and one true terror at the rim of his kingdom is, at last, a story. "All right," he said again, more quietly this time, to the watching cosmos and to the absence that did not watch back. "I see you. I'll come for you when I'm ready. In the meantime," he glanced toward the far frames where a sea between worlds was even now parting before a determined prow, "I have guests." The second to come was the lady, again, though she did not stay long, and her second visit was so brief that the narrator would omit it entirely were it not for one detail that proved, in the long unspooling of events, to be the hinge on which a great deal turned. She appeared at the edge of the gallery. In the soft blue light she carried with her the way other people carry a smell of rain, and she did not approach the chair. She stood at a distance with her arms folded, and she looked at Harry sitting in his shabby armchair at the center of all creation, and she said, "Severano sent a herald." "He did. You sent him back with his name." "I did." The lady at the end of things was quiet for a moment. Then she said, and her voice had lost some of its earlier playfulness, had taken on the gravity of someone delivering a warning they would rather not give. "The proud ones are going to come, Harry. I told you that. But I want you to understand something before they do, because you're going to be tempted with each of them to do what you just did to the herald, to see them, to reach into them and find the small, frightened person under the crown and call it by its name." She unfolded her arms. "It will work, that's the problem. It will work every single time, because everyone, even the proudest goddess in all the skies, has a small, frightened person under the crown, and you can find it, and you can call it out, and they will kneel to you because you've seen them more truly than anyone has ever dared." She looked at him steadily. "And if you do it that way, if you win them by exposing them, then you won't have a court. You'll have a collection of broken people who can't leave because you're holding the only mirror that shows them whole. That's what Severano has, that's what every tyrant has, and it would be so easy with what you are now to build the same thing and call it love." Harry said nothing. He had gone very still in the shabby chair. "So here is what I want from you," the lady said. "When they come, and the first of them is already crossing the sea between worlds, spear in hand, and she is magnificent, and she will not bend easily, which is exactly why you must not bend her. I want you to let them keep their crowns. Don't reach in, don't expose them. Win them if you win them at all, the slow, stupid, mortal way, the way that can fail." A corner of her mouth moved. "It's the only kind of kneeling worth having. The kind they can stand back up from whenever they like, and choose, every morning, not to." And before Harry could answer, before he could ask the dozen questions that had risen in him, chief among them why she of all the powers in creation should care how he won his court, she was gone back into the place where endings were filed, leaving him alone in the gallery with her warning sitting in him like a swallowed star. He understood dimly that she had just given him the one piece of advice that would make winning her own self harder. He understood that she had done it on purpose. And he understood, sitting in his shabby armchair at the center of everything, with the first goddess already crossing the sea between worlds to measure him, that the lady at the end of things had just made the contest fair, had handicapped him, the most powerful being in all creation, out of what could only be called principle, and that this was, of everything that had happened in the long, strange hour of his ascension, the first thing that made him feel. Despite the armchair and the skies and the gallery built to his measure, something he had not expected ever to feel again, it made him feel courted. He laughed once more alone in the house of all things, and the sound of it rolled out across the layered skies, and on a hidden island a woman with a spear lifted her head at a noise she could not place and frowned, and quickened her pace toward the sea. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. The Amazon and the Armchair. The sea between worlds is not, despite the name some poet of the lower spheres once gave it, made of water, though it behaves enough like water that the metaphor has survived several civilizations and outlived the poet. It is made of possibility in its rawest and least committed form, the stuff that worlds are eventually condensed from, lapping and luminous and undecided, and to cross it requires either a vessel of considerable enchantment or a will of considerable stubbornness, and Diana of the Messira had brought both, because she believed in redundancy the way she believed in most virtues, which is to say completely and without apology. She had been crossing for what felt, even to one of her endurance, like a long while. Time did peculiar things in the between space. It pooled in some stretches and thinned in others, and more than once she had looked back to find the wake of her vessel still bright behind her while the prow plunged into a region where her own breath came slow and syrupy. She did not let it trouble her. She had crossed worse. She stood at the prow with her spear planted beside her like a standard, her shield slung across her back, her dark hair streaming in a wind that came from no direction because all directions were in the between space the same direction, and she fixed her eyes upon the brightening point ahead, the new weight, the thing that had no business existing, and she rehearsed, as she sailed, the questions she would put to it. The questions were the important part. Diana had not come, whatever the Deathwolf's mistress and the storm-haired goddess and the assembling powers of the lower spheres might have assumed, to conquer or to kneel. She had come to ask. For she was a daughter of a people who had learned, across 3,000 years of exile, that the first and most dangerous lie a power tells is the lie of its own inevitability, that the strong are strong because they deserve to be, that the crown sits where it sits by right rather than by accident or theft, and she had appointed herself, without anyone's leave, the asker of the question that punctured that lie. Who gave you this? She meant to ask the new weight. And what will you do with it? And depending on the answers, will you put it down, or must I make you? She was aware that the last question was, on its face, absurd. She had felt the size of the thing she was sailing toward. She was a demigod, a princess, a warrior without equal among her own kind and the equal of nearly any champion among the others, and the new weight made her feel, for the first time since girlhood, the way a single brave torch feels held up against a night that goes on past every horizon. But Diana had built her entire life on the principle that the size of a wrong has no bearing on one's obligation to oppose it, and she was not about to abandon the principle merely because the wrong in question might be large enough to unmake her with a stray thought. If anything, the size sharpened her. A small tyrant is a nuisance. A tyrant the size of all creation is the only opponent worthy of the whole of what she was. She reached the shore of the gallery without quite understanding how a shore could exist in a place that had no water, and she stepped off her vessel onto a surface that was not ground and walked into the standing place above all worlds with her spear in her hand and her chin level. And she saw at the center of everything, beneath skies layered past counting, a man sitting in a shabby armchair with his feet on a footstool, drinking what appeared to be tea. Diana stopped. She had prepared in the long crossing for a great many things. She had prepared for a throne of fire. She had prepared for a giant of light, a face the size of a galaxy, a voice that would flatten her against the not ground with the weight of its first syllable. She had prepared, grimly, for the possibility that the new weight would not deign to take a form she could perceive at all, and that she would have to address her questions to a pressure in the air. She had not prepared for an armchair. The armchair undid something in her battle readiness the way a single off-key note undoes a symphony, and she stood at the edge of the gallery with her spear half raised and her carefully rehearsed questions scattering like startled birds, and she said, because it was the only thing that survived the scattering, "You are drinking tea." "I am," Harry agreed. He did not rise. He did not, she noted, do any of the things that powerful men do when a woman with a spear walks into their presence. He did not straighten, or summon guards, or arrange his face into the particular blandness that means a threat is being calculated. He looked at her over the rim of his cup with an interest that was entirely undefended, the interest of a man watching the most welcome thing that had happened to him all day walk through his door. "Would you like some? The gallery makes it however you take it. I haven't worked out how. I suspect it reads the wanting directly, which is a little invasive, but the tea's good enough that I've decided to forgive it. I did not come for tea." Diana found her footing again, found the questions where they had scattered, and gathered them back up. She advanced into the gallery, and the skies wheeled slowly around her, and she planted her spear against the not ground with a crack that should not have echoed in a place without walls, and yet did, because the gallery, she would learn, was courteous to drama when drama was sincerely meant. "I am Diana, princess of the Masira, daughter of Hippolyta, champion of the Amazons. I have crossed the sea between worlds to put 3 questions to the power that has lately seated itself above all powers. You will answer them." "All right," Harry said. She had braced for refusal. The bracing went nowhere, like a shoulder thrown against a door that proves to be already open, and she nearly stumbled into the room beyond it. "You will answer them," she repeated more slowly, as though the agreement might be a trap that revealed itself on second hearing. I said all right. A corner of his mouth moved. "You crossed the sea between worlds to ask me something. That's a great deal of effort, and I've found that effort generally deserves an answer. Ask." "I'll tell you the truth, which I'll warn you in advance is a less satisfying thing to receive than people expect. The truth almost never comes in the shape you've built your questions to catch." Diana studied him. She had spent her long life learning to read the tells of the powerful, the microflinch that betrays a lie, the oversteadiness that betrays a rehearsed one, the way a guilty man's eyes go to the exits and a frightened man's go to your hands. She read Harry, and she found, unsettlingly, none of it. He was not steady in the way of a man controlling himself. He was steady in the way of still water, which is not controlling anything, but simply has nowhere it urgently needs to be. It was, she thought, either the finest performance she had ever witnessed or no performance at all, and she did not yet know which, and the not knowing was, she realized, exactly why she had come. So she asked, "My first question." She let the spear lean against her shoulder, freeing her hands, a small, unconscious courtesy of her own. One does not interrogate with a weapon leveled, not if one wishes the answers to be honest. "Who gave you this power?" "No one," Harry said. "That's the unsatisfying answer I warned you about. I'd love to tell you a god handed it down to me, or that I climbed to it over the bodies of rivals, or that I bargained for it at some cosmic crossroads. Those would all be answers you could do something with. You could judge a man who took it. You could oppose a god who gave it. But the truth is that I just kept not dying until there was nothing left that was bigger than me, and the power flowed in to fill the space, the way water fills a hole without anyone deciding it should. It's not deserved. It's not earned. It happened to me. He glanced at the layered skies, gauging a few hours to get used to it, and I'm telling you honestly that the thing that troubles me most about it is exactly the thing you've come to challenge, that there's no one to hold accountable. Not even me. You can't hold a man accountable for a flood. It was not the answer she had built her question to catch. She felt the question close on empty air. And she felt beneath her ribs the first faint loosening of a knot she had carried so long she had forgotten. It was a knot, and not simply the shape of her own chest. Because in 3,000 years of putting that question to the powerful, she had never once heard a power admit that its power was an accident. They always claimed it. The claiming was the whole disease. And here was the largest power she had ever stood before, declining to claim, and she did not know what to do with the declining except to distrust it, so she did. "A man might say that," she said, "precisely to disarm a woman who came armed. It is not my fault, it merely happened to me." The tyrant's favorite lullaby. You did not seize the flood, perhaps, but you are standing in it now, dry and comfortable in a chair, drinking tea. A flood that comfortable has decided to stay. "That's fair," Harry said, and the readiness of the agreement undid her balance a second time. "That's completely fair, and it's the right second question, even though it wasn't the one you planned. Yes, I'm in it now. I could give it back. I've thought about it in the last few hours, whether I could pour myself back out into the smallness I came from and let some other accident happen to someone else. And the honest answer is that I don't think I should, and I want you to hear the difference between can't and shouldn't, because it matters." He set the teacup down on the air beside his chair where it stayed, the gallery holding it the way a good host holds your coat. "There's a thing eating the edge of creation. You haven't seen it. Almost no one has, because it eats quietly from the rim inward, and it doesn't leave grief behind to mark where it's been. I felt a world end while I sat here this afternoon. Not die, end, erased so cleanly its neighbors didn't notice. If I pour myself back out now, that thing keeps eating, and there's no one left standing in the flood to face it. So I'm staying, not because the chair is comfortable, because someone has to, and the accident made it me." Diana was quiet. The gallery was quiet around her. Somewhere in the layered skies a star went nova in perfect silence, a slow blossom of gold against the dark, and neither of them looked at it. "You could be lying," she said at last, "about the thing that eats. It would be a convenient monster for a power that wished to justify keeping its throne. I cannot step down. There is a great darkness only I can face." "I have heard that one too. It is the second verse of the lullaby." "I could be lying," Harry agreed. "I'm not. But you have no way to know that from where you're standing, and I'd think less of you if you took my word for it, so let me offer you something better than my word." He looked at her, and for the first time there was something in his expression that had a shape she recognized. Not threat, not seduction, but invitation. The clean, dangerous invitation of one fighter to another. "Your third question was going to be whether you should put me down or whether I'd put myself down. You weren't sure which way you'd swing until you'd heard the first two answers. You're still not sure, so don't decide with your judgment. You don't trust your judgment of me yet, and you're right not to. Decide the way your people decide. Test me." The word landed in Diana like a key in a lock she had been carrying her whole life without knowing what it opened. Test me, not fight me, which is what the powerful always offered, the contest of force that the strongest always won and called justice. Test. It was the language of the trial, the language of her own island, where a champion was not the one who could break the most bones but the one who passed the proving. And she understood, hearing it in his mouth, that he had reached into the grammar of her people and found the one verb that would make her trust the contest. And she felt a flare of suspicion at the precision of it. And then she remembered the warning she had not been given but could nonetheless sense hanging in the gallery like the smell of rain after it has stopped. And she understood that he had chosen the word and then deliberately not reached 1 inch further into her than the word required. "You restrain yourself," she observed. You chose that word to win me and then you stopped. Why? Because someone I respect told me not to win people by opening them up, Harry said. She's right, anyone can be opened. It proves nothing except that the one holding the knife was holding the knife. If you're going to decide I'm worth following or worth ending, I want you to decide it about the whole of me with all your armor on, fighting at the top of what you are. Not about some frightened thing I dug out of you to make you grateful. He stood then, unfolding from the armchair, and he did not grow vast or terrible in the standing. He was simply a man on his feet of ordinary height, in clothes that the gallery had quietly mended while he sat. So, test me, name the proving, I'll submit to it honestly. If I fail it, you'll have your answer, and I give you my word I won't use what I am to argue with the verdict. You would let me judge you. It was not quite a question. I'd let you try, Harry said, and there it was at last, the dry thing under the serenity, the flicker of humor that told her he was neither a saint nor a fool. Whether you can is the proving. Choose the test, princess. Diana chose the test that her people reserved for the assessment of kings, because it was the test that could not be passed by strength, and she wished to see what he was when strength was taken from the table. It was called in the old tongue the weighing of the open hand, and it was very simple, and it had broken more champions than any blade. She walked to him across the knot ground of the gallery, and she stood before him close enough to strike, and she set her spear down deliberately, fully laying the weapon of her whole life flat upon the surface that was not ground, and she opened her hands and held them out, palms up, between them. The test is this, she said. I will tell you something true and terrible and mine. A wound, the thing I would never say to a power I meant to obey, because to say it is to hand him the place to press. And you will hold it, you will not use it. You will not soothe it or fix it or reach into me to make it smaller, because to fix it without my asking is its own kind of conquest. You will simply hold it the way I am holding my hands open between us, and you will give me something true and terrible of your own in return, so that we stand even, each holding the other's wound, neither pressing. That is the proving. Most kings fail it in the first breath. They cannot bear to be handed a wound and not squeeze. Her dark eyes did not leave his face. Can you bear it? Tell me, Harry said quietly, and we'll find out. And Diana of Themyscira, who had not spoken the thing aloud in 3,000 years, who had carried it across the founding and the exile and the long centuries of being a symbol that other people needed to be perfect, told him. The narrator will not transcribe it. It is hers, and she gave it under the terms of approving, and to set it down on a page for the idle eyes of an audience would be to fail the very test she was administering. It is enough to say that it concerned the manner of her own making, the clay and the breath and the long childhood doubt of a girl who knew she had been wished into being rather than born of love the way the others were, and the particular loneliness of a being who was given to a people as a gift and grew up suspecting she was loved as one loves a gift, gratefully, and not as one loves a daughter, helplessly. It is enough to say that she had never told it, because every power she had ever met would have heard in it the lever that moved her and pressed. Harry did not press. He stood with his hands open and received the wound and held it. And the narrator, who has watched a great many beings receive a great many confessions, reports that the holding was the most strenuous thing the new god had yet done in his reign, more strenuous than facing down the herald, more strenuous than standing his ground before the warm dark at the edge of everything, because every fiber of what he was, the caring that was his flaw and his glory, strained toward the wound, wanting to heal it. He could have, with a fraction of a thought, he could have reached into her and unmade the doubt, given her in an instant the certainty of being loved that she had spent 3,000 years failing to find, and she would have wept with the relief of it and knelt and been his forever. The trap the lady had warned him of stood open before him, beautifully disguised as mercy, and Diana had walked him to its very edge precisely to see whether he would step in. He did not step in. He held her wound the way she held her hands, open, unpressing, and when he had held it long enough to be certain he could, he gave her his own. He told her about the boy in the cupboard. Not the war, not the prophecy, not the grand mythology that had been built around him in his small world, and would now be built around him across all worlds, the cupboard. The understair dark and the spider silence and the particular arithmetic a child does when no one comes. The slow, patient, ruinous sum by which a child concludes that the failure to be loved must be his own fault, because the alternative that the adults are simply wrong, is too large and too lonely for a small mind to hold. He told her that he had become a god and that the cupboard was still in him, that the caring which was now the size of all creation had grown from a root planted in that dark, that he soothed strangers' griefs across 1,000 worlds in part, because somewhere under the throne there was still a child waiting for someone to open the door, and that he was telling her this not to win her sympathy, but because she had handed him her wound under a fair law, and the law required him to stand even. And then he stopped with his hand still open, and he did not ask her to fix it, and he did not soothe it himself, and he simply let it stand between them in the open air of the gallery, his held beside hers, neither pressing. For a long moment Diana did not move. The skies wheeled. The silent nova in the far frame finished blooming and began, with the patience of physics, to fade. Then she bent and picked up her spear. And the narrator wishes it understood that this was not surrender, because a warrior who retrieves her weapon has not surrendered. And she held the spear loosely point down, and she looked at the man who had been handed the lever of her whole life and declined to pull it. And she said in a voice that had lost its interrogator's edge and found beneath it something graver and more dangerous, the voice of a woman making a decision she would not be able to unmake. "You pass the proving, then you have your answer," Harry said. "Whatever it is, I'll abide by it." "My answer," Diana said slowly, "is that I do not yet have an answer and that this troubles me more than failure would have." She turned from him and walked a few paces into the gallery and stood with her back to him, looking out at a frame in which her own hidden island lay small and bright and asleep. Her mother somewhere in it, her sisters, the whole of the life she had crossed the sea between worlds to defend from exactly the kind of power she had now failed to condemn. "I came to weigh a tyrant. I find a man who will not let me make him one, even to spare himself my judgment. That is not a thing I have a verdict for. My people did not write a law for the king who refuses the lever." She was quiet. "I do not know whether to kneel to you or to stand guard over you to make certain you never become the thing you so carefully declined to be today." "Then do the second one," Harry said. She turned. "Don't kneel." He had not moved from where he stood. He had not pursued her across the gallery the way a lesser man would have pursued the advantage. "I don't want you kneeling, Diana. I've got a whole multiverse that's going to want to kneel to me out of fear or hunger, or the simple gravity of the thing I've become. And a court of people on their knees is exactly how a man like me turns into a man like the one you came to weigh. What I haven't got, what I'll never get by being what I am, is someone who'll stand up. Someone who'll stay on her feet and watch me and put the spear back in my face the day I start to slip. You said it yourself, you don't know whether to obey me or guard me. Guard me. Stand at my side with your weapon and your suspicion and your impossible standards, and the day I fail you're proving the real one, the long one, the one that lasts the rest of forever, you'll already be armed and close enough to do something about it." A corner of his mouth moved. "It's the worst offer any king has ever made to a champion. Permanent employment, no kneeling, and the job is to be ready to kill me. Most would call it madness." Diana of Themyscira looked at him for a long while, and then she did something that the watching cosmos had not seen an Amazon do in the presence of a power in 3,000 years, and that the propagandists would later misreport in a dozen flattering and inaccurate ways. She laughed a real laugh, startled out of her bright and unguarded, and she planted her spear against the knot ground with the crack that the gallery courteously echoed, and she said, "It is the only offer a king has ever made me that I could accept without despising myself in the morning." She inclined her head, not a kneel, a soldier's nod, the acknowledgement of one honorable combatant to another across a field where the fighting has for now stopped. "I will guard you, Harry of the cupboard. I will stand at your side and keep my spear keen and my standards crueler than any you will meet. And on the day you slip I will be the first and the fastest, and you will have no one to blame but yourself for having recruited me. By the loom of the fates I so swear." "By the loom of the fates," Harry repeated, and the words in his mouth were not mockery, but the careful honoring of a thing sacred to her and not to him, which she noted, and which moved her more than she let her face report. "Welcome to the worst job in all creation, princess. The tea's good at least." "I do not drink tea," said Diana, and then, because the gallery read the wanting directly and was, as has been established, courteous, a cup appeared at her elbow on a column of patient air, steaming, prepared exactly the way she had not known she took it, and she looked at it and looked at him and surrendered to the smallest possible degree, which is the only degree a woman like Diana ever surrenders, and picked it up. They talked after that for a span the narrator declines to measure, because measuring it would imply it was finite. She asked him the questions she had not rehearsed, the ones that come after judgment when judgment has been suspended, what he meant to do, how he meant to face the warm dark, whether he had a plan or merely a posture, and he answered honestly, which mostly meant admitting he did not yet know, and she found his not knowing more reassuring than certainty would have been, because she had met certain gods and buried the worlds they were certain about. "Show me," she said at length, "this thing that eats. You have asked me to guard you against the day you slip, but a guard who has not seen the enemy is a decoration. If I am to stand at your side, I will look upon the thing that frightens the only being in creation nothing ought to frighten." So he showed her. He did not move, he simply turned her attention the way a host turns a guest toward a window, and the gallery obliged, and the layered skies wheeled until the corner of darkness swung into view, the missing tooth absence at the rim of everything, the curled and blackening frames, the warmth that her own divinity could feel from across the whole breadth of creation like a hand held a careful distance from her cheek. Diana had faced the war god of her own pantheon and felt the cold, clean fury of him and not flinched. She looked now upon the warm dark and she did flinch, a single involuntary tightening across her shoulders, and she was too honest a creature to pretend she had not. "It does not hate," she said slowly, working it out, the strategist in her surfacing through the warrior. "I expected hate, a devourer should hate. This is appetite without a face. One does not negotiate with a mouth. One does not even frighten it. Fear is a thing you do to a mind, and there is no mind here to receive it." She turned from the dark to look at him, and there was a new gravity in her regard, the gravity of a soldier who has just understood that the campaign is real. You cannot reason with it. You cannot win its loyalty as you won mine, because there is no one in there to be won. And you cannot simply destroy it, or you would have done so already in the hours you have had, which means it cannot be destroyed by power alone, or you who are power alone would suffice against it. That's the heart of it, Harry said, and the dry humor had gone out of him. He regarded the dark with the level attention of a man looking at the one problem his enormous tools could not solve. I could pour everything I am at it. I've modeled the attempt. I can do that now, run a thing forward in my mind and watch it fail before I waste the world on it. I pour myself in and it eats what I pour and grows, because that's the trick of it. It doesn't resist force. It accepts force. It's the only thing in all creation that gets larger the harder you hit it. The Herald wanted me to be a tyrant. Sovrano wants me to be a vassal. Both of those I can refuse with a word. This wants me to attack it, and the day I do is the day I feed it the rest of everything. Then it is not a war, Diana said. It is a riddle wearing a war's clothing. He looked at her and something in his face shifted. Say that again. It is a riddle, she repeated, holding his gaze, wearing a war's clothing. You keep reaching for the soldier's answer because the thing arrives dressed as an enemy. But you have just told me the soldier's answer feeds it. So the dress is a lie. Whatever ends it will not be a blow, it will be an understanding. A word, the right word in the right place, the way you gave the Herald back his name and undid him without a wound. You did not defeat the Herald, Harry. You corrected him. Perhaps the dark is to be corrected and not killed. Though I confess I do not know what one says to a mouth. The gallery was very quiet. In the far frame, the faded nova was a cooling ember now. And across the immeasurable wall of worlds, a billion small lives went on being born and falling in love and grieving and ending. All of them held, all of them attended to by a fraction of the mind of the man who stood at the center listening to an Amazon reframe the end of everything as a problem of vocabulary. You've been a guard for the length of a single conversation, Harry said at last, and you've already given me the first useful thought anyone's had about that thing since I noticed it. I spent the afternoon treating it as a wound to be closed or an enemy to be met. You've spent 10 minutes and decided it's a sentence I haven't finished reading. He shook his head slowly. The lady was right about you. She said you wouldn't bend easily, and that was exactly why I shouldn't bend you. She didn't mention you'd be useful. I think she left that out on purpose, so I'd have the pleasure of finding out. The lady, Diana repeated. You have spoken of her twice now. The one who told you not to win people by opening them. Who is she? And here the narrator observes a small thing that would matter enormously later. That Harry asked a direct question about the lady at the end of things by the woman who had just sworn to guard him was for the first time in the whole of his brief reign not entirely truthful. He did not lie. He simply declined to give the whole of it. She's death, he said, an aspect of it, the kind face it wears for people it likes. She's been opening doors for me since before I understood there were doors. He paused, and Diana, who read tells for a living, saw the pause and filed it where she filed all things that did not yet add up. She's the reason I'm doing any of this the right way instead of the easy way. I owe her more than I've worked out how to say, and I don't fully understand why she's helping me, which is the part that keeps me honest, because a man should always be a little suspicious of the gift he can't account for. You are fond of her, Diana said. It was not an accusation. It was an observation made by a woman cataloging the field on which she had just enlisted, noting where the high ground lay and where the rivers ran. I'm fond of a great many things, Harry said, which was not an answer, and Diana let him not answer because she had administered enough provings to know that some doors open only when they are not being pushed. There was a thing she wished to say, and being Diana, she said it because she had learned across 3,000 years that the words one swallows curdle, and that a guard who keeps her counsel is no better than a spy. You will have others, she said. I felt them in the crossing, turning toward you the way I turned, a storm that wears the shape of a woman, a maker of beautiful things, very old, very curious, the one who rides toward us now with her wolves. Others I could not name. The whole sky bent toward this point when you arrived, Harry, and I was only the first prow to reach the shore. She held his gaze, level, unembarrassed, a woman naming the terrain. I will not pretend I do not see the shape of what is gathering. A power of your size does not collect a single companion. It collects a court, and the court of a king who looks the way you look and listens the way you listen will not be a court of soldiers only. She let that stand. I tell you this so you know that I see it, and that I have not enlisted in ignorance. I have buried enough illusions to refuse the comfort of a fresh one. It would have been easy for him to deflect it, and the narrator notes that a lesser man would have hidden behind modesty or feigned not to understand. Harry did neither. I see it too, he said. I won't insult you by pretending I don't, or by pretending I've decided what to do about it, because I haven't. I know what the gravity of this thing wants to make of me. The king on the throne with the goddesses arrayed at his feet. The picture every storyteller in every world is already itching to draw. And I know the picture is a trap with the same shape as all the others. If I let them gather because the gathering flatters me, I've become exactly the man you cross the sea to weigh, only with better company. He was quiet for a beat. Here's the only promise I'll make you, because it's the only one I'm sure I can keep. Whatever gathers here, it gathers freely, or it doesn't gather. No one stays who can't leave. No one kneels who can't stand. You're the first, and you didn't kneel, and that's the rule now. You said it by walking in with a spear and walking out with a post instead of a collar. Anyone who comes after you meets the standard you made, or they don't come in, including the one with the wolves. Diana considered this. She had expected, she realized, to feel the cold flicker of a woman told she is to be one of several. She was proud, and pride does not enjoy company in matters of regard, and she searched herself honestly for the flicker and was surprised and a little disarmed to find instead something closer to relief. For he had not asked her to be the only one, which would have been a lie she would eventually have caught him in. He had asked her to be the first, and to make the rule, and to hold the rule against everyone who came after, which was not a smaller thing than being the only one, but a larger and stranger and more dangerous one, and far more in keeping with what she was. Then I shall make the rule cruel, she said, and there was the ghost of the bright unguarded laugh in it now, and enforce it without mercy, and the goddesses who come courting will curse the Amazon at the door long before they curse the king on the chair. She inclined her head a second time. It is, I find, a post I am suited to. I am perhaps the only being in all your skies who could stand inside a king's court and remain entirely unmoved by the king. Don't oversell it, Harry said mildly, and the dry thing flickered, and Diana discovered that she did not, in fact, remain entirely unmoved, and chose with the discipline of 3,000 years not to report this to her own face. She had risen to go, not to leave, she was clear about that, but to bring her vessel into the gallery's harbor and send word to her mother that she would be away from the island for a while, possibly a long while, possibly forever, on a matter concerning the management of a new god when the gallery changed. It was a small change at first, a coldness where there had been no temperature. A green light, faint and far, kindling at the edge of the layered skies, the particular sickly luminous green of corpse fire and envy. And then a sound, rolling in from the between space, that was not the silence of the nova nor the courteous echo of a planted spear, but something with appetite in it of a wholly different and more personal kind than the darks. A baying, the cry of beasts bred for the hunt and starved for a worthy quarry, drawing nearer. Diana's hand was on her spear before her mind had named the threat. What is that? She said, the warrior's flatness back in her voice. Harry had risen from the armchair. He was looking toward the green light with an expression Diana would come to know well and to distrust thoroughly, the expression of a man who finds the arrival of mortal danger faintly, unforgivably amusing. That, he said, would be my second guess. I felt her saddling up a while ago. She rules a realm where the dead outnumber the living. She styles herself the goddess of death, and she has, unless I badly misread the baying, brought wolves. He glanced at Diana, and the dry thing was full in his face now, undisguised. You wanted to guard me. You're about to find out the post started early. The baying rose, the green light bloomed. And across the sea between worlds, riding at the head of a pack of beasts woven from corpse fire and old grudges, her antlered crown catching the light of every dying star she passed, came Hela of the realm of the dead, who had not come to ask 3 questions, and who had never in her long covetous existence laid down her weapon before anyone, and who intended to court the new king of all things in the only language she had ever bothered to learn, which was the language of conquest. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3, The Goddess Who Came to Conquer. Hela of the realm of the dead made her entrance into the house of all things the way she did everything, which is to say with the unshakable conviction that an audience of millions was watching and would be disappointed by anything less than splendor, and the narrator, who was in fact watching, confirms that she was not disappointed. She came across the threshold of the gallery on a tide of green corpse fire, her death wolves fanning out before her in a snarling crescent, her cloak of woven shadow streaming behind her to a length that no physics endorsed, and her antlered crown rising from her brow like the architecture of some cathedral devoted entirely to herself. She was magnificent. She knew she was magnificent. The knowing was, if anything, the most magnificent thing about her, because there is a particular splendor available only to those who have decided, against all the evidence the universe keeps trying to provide, that they are the center of it, and Hela had made that decision so long ago and defended it through so many indignities that it had calcified into something almost admirable, a self-regard so total it bent the light. So, she said, and her voice filled the gallery the way smoke fills a room, finding every corner, leaving a residue. This is the new weight that made the whole sky lane. I confess, little king, I expected a throne. She regarded the shabby armchair, and her lip curled with the connoisseur's disdain of a woman who has spent eternities coveting thrones and considers herself their foremost critic. I have sat upon 100 thrones I was not permitted to keep. I know thrones, that is a chair. It is, Harry agreed. He had not risen. He sat in the chair that offended her with his ankle crossed over his knee, entirely at ease, and the ease was its own provocation, though he did not intend it as one. A man who does not perform his power insults those who have spent their lives performing theirs simply by existing. Would you like one? The gallery makes them. It made me this. I expect if you wanted a throne it would build you something appropriately enormous, though I'd warn you it has a sense of humor and might make it just slightly too tall so your feet didn't quite reach. The death wolves growled. Hela quieted them with a gesture and advanced into the gallery, and Diana moved, not far, not fast, but with the economy of a woman who has chosen her ground before the fighting starts, to stand at an angle between the goddess of death and the king in the chair, her spear loose in her grip, her shield still slung but her shoulders squared. It was not quite a blocking of the way. It was a statement about the existence of a way and where it ran and who decided who walked it. Hela stopped. She looked at Diana the way a duchess looks at a particularly forward servant. And what, she inquired, is this? This, said Diana, is the door. The door. Hela's smile widened, showing the edges of it. The little king keeps a guard dog. How charmingly mortal of him. She took another step, testing, and Diana did not move, and the not moving was answered. And something passed between the two women in that instant that the narrator wishes to flag for the audience's attention, because it would matter through all the chapters to come. A recognition between the Amazon and the goddess of death that they were going to be a problem for each other for a very long time, and a flicker on both their faces, swiftly mastered, of something that was not quite dislike and not quite respect, but the volatile compound of the two that forms between rivals who suspect, against their own preference, that they may eventually have to like one another. Hela, Harry said, and the use of her name, simply without title, the way one addresses a guest and not a goddess, pulled her attention back to the chair as nothing else in the gallery could have. She's not a guard dog, she's the rule. You'll find I've got exactly one, and Diana enforces it, and the rule is this: you can come in, you can stay as long as you like, you can leave whenever you choose, and at no point do you kneel. Those are the terms. They're not negotiable, and before you tell me you came here to make me kneel to you, or to make me yours, or whatever conquest you've rehearsed across the crossing, and you have rehearsed one, I can see the shape of it sitting behind your teeth. I want you to understand that the terms apply to you too. I'm not going to conquer you. I'm not going to be conquered by you. If you can't do this without one of us owning the other, then the door, he nodded at Diana, works in both directions, and there's no shame in walking back out of it. For a moment, Hela said nothing. The narrator suspects it was the first moment in a very long age that she had encountered a frame she had not been offered and could not simply seize, and the unfamiliarity of it sat strangely on her, the way solid ground sits strangely under the feet of a sailor too long at sea. She had come prepared for a contest. Contest, she understood, she had lost most of hers, but losing a contest at least confirms that a contest was the correct thing to be having. What Harry had done was decline the contest without declining her, and the distinction was so foreign to her that she circled it suspiciously, looking for the trap. You refuse to conquer me, she repeated. You who could. I have felt what you are. You could unmake me with less thought than it takes me to lift my hand. You could bend my will, rewrite my wanting, make me adore you, and call it my own idea. Every king I have ever served imagined doing precisely that to me, and most of them tried, and I survived them by being more patient and more poisonous than their ambitions. And you who could do it more thoroughly than all of them combined and never break a sweat, you sit in your insulting little chair and tell me you will not. Her eyes narrowed. Why, do not say mercy. I have a great and educated contempt for mercy. It is the lie the strong tell to feel clean. Then I won't say mercy, Harry said. I'll say something you'll like even less because it's true. I won't conquer you because conquering you would be boring. He let that land. You've been conquered before, or fought it off, or watched it tried. You just told me so. It's the only story anyone's ever offered you. The throne you can't keep, the king who wants to own you, the long poisonous patience it takes to outlast him. You've gotten so good at that story that you've forgotten it's not the only one, and if I conquered you, I'd just be the next verse of the song you've been singing since before my world had a sun. I'm not interested in being a verse. I've got the whole of creation eating itself at the edges and a job that needs people who chose it, and you, Hela, are far too interesting to waste on a conquest. I'd rather find out what you do when, for once, nobody's trying to own you and nobody's letting you own them. I genuinely don't know. Neither do you. That's the most interesting question in this room, and the throne you wanted isn't even in the top 10. The Death Wolves, sensing that the conquest their mistress had promised them was not going to arrive on schedule, milled and whined. Hela did not quiet them this time. She had gone very still, in the way of a predator that has scented something it cannot classify, and she studied the king in the chair with an attention she had not given anything in centuries, because he had done the one thing guaranteed to seize the whole of her regard. He had called her interesting and meant it, and Hela, who had been called beautiful and terrible and dangerous and many other things by many other mouths, could not recall the last time anyone had been curious about her rather than afraid of her or hungry for her. "You are trying to seduce me," she accused, "by refusing to—" "No," Harry said. "If I were trying to seduce you, you'd know, because you'd feel the floor tilt toward me and you'd hate yourself for sliding and we'd both end up in the song again. I'm trying to talk to you. It's a different thing. People confuse them because so few have ever done the second one to a woman who looks like you." He uncrossed his ankle and leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and the layered skies leaned with him, and for a moment the goddess of death and the king of all things were simply two people in a room, close enough to speak quietly. "Sit down, Hela, not on a throne, just sit. Send the wolves to go chase something. The gallery's got a few billion worlds. Surely one of them has a deer, and sit and tell me what you actually want. Not the throne, the thing under the throne. The thing you've been substituting thrones for because thrones were the only thing anyone ever let you reach for." It was a dangerous thing to say, the narrator notes, and skated very near the edge of the lady's warning, near to reaching in, near to naming the small, frightened thing under the crown. But Harry had not named it. He had only pointed at the door of it and declined to open it, and left the opening to her, and that distinction was the whole of the difference between a man who sees you and a man who uses what he sees. Hela felt the difference. She had a connoisseur's palate for manipulation, having survived so much of it, and she tasted the thing Harry was offering and found, to her considerable disquiet, that it contained no poison at all, which was so unprecedented that she did not know whether to be moved or insulted. She chose, characteristically, to be theatrical instead, because theater was the armor she wore when the other armors failed. "You presume a great deal, little king," she said, "to imagine there is a thing under the throne. Perhaps I simply like thrones. Perhaps I am exactly as shallow as my reputation, a vain woman who wishes to sit higher than her brother and her father and all the strutting golden fools of the realms, and there is nothing under the wanting but more wanting, all the way down." She lifted her chin and the antlers caught the light. "Have you considered that some of us are precisely what we appear, and that your kindness, in insisting otherwise, is its own kind of insult? You look at me and refuse to believe I am merely terrible. You want me to have a wound so that you can be the man who did not press it. How flattering for you, how very little it has to do with me." And here Harry did a thing that surprised Diana, who was still standing at her angle by the door, and surprised the watching cosmos, and surprised most of all Hela. He laughed not unkindly, but with the delight of a man who has just been outmaneuvered by an opponent he had underestimated. "That's fair," he said. "That's completely fair, and you're right, and I apologize. I did want you to have a wound I could be gracious about. That's a flaw of mine, I'll tell you about it sometime. It involves a cupboard, and you just caught me doing it, which almost nobody does, and which means I was right about you being interesting and wrong about why." He spread his hands. "So let's say you're exactly what you appear. A vain, terrible, throne-coveting goddess with nothing under the wanting but more wanting. Fine, I'll take you at your word. Here's my offer to the woman you say you are. I have no throne for you to covet, no crown to sit higher than, no father or brother to spite, and I will never, ever let you own me, which means you can never win the only game you know how to play. By your own account, there is nothing here for you. So why," and his voice gentled not into pity but into the quiet of genuine inquiry, "are you still standing in my gallery, Hela? The door's right there, Diana will even hold it. If you're only the wanting and there's nothing here to want, you'd have left already. You haven't. I'm not going to tell you what that means. I think you should get to find that out yourself." Hela stayed. She did not sitting on the terms he had offered would have been a concession too large to make on the first day, and she was not built to concede largely or quickly. But she sent the wolves away with a flick of her fingers, dissolving them back into the corpse fire they were woven from, and she paced the gallery instead, prowling its impossible perimeter, examining the frames of the layered worlds with the restless attention of a woman who needs to be doing something with her hands and her contempt while her certainties rearrange themselves. Harry let her prowl. He returned to his easy posture in the chair and did not watch her, which was its own courtesy. Nothing makes a proud creature more comfortable than the sense that it is not being observed, and Harry, who could observe everything, had learned the value of performing inattention. "This dark," Hela said abruptly from across the gallery. She had stopped before the corner where the warm absence ate inward. She did not flinch the way Diana had. Hela had spent her existence in the company of endings, and an ending that ate cleanly was, to her professional eye, less a horror than a curiosity. "You know what this is?" "I know what it does," Harry said. "I don't know what it is." "There's a difference, and the difference is the whole problem." "It does not kill," Hela said. She had crouched before the dark, heedless of the warmth, peering into it with the frank fascination of a coroner. "I know killing. Killing leaves something for me, a soul, a residue, an echo in my halls. This leaves nothing. The lives it takes do not come to me. They do not go anywhere. They are simply revised as if they had never been, and for the first time something other than theater entered her voice, a thin note of professional outrage. "That is an abomination, little king. Not because it is cruel, because it is theft. Those endings were mine. Every ending in every world is mine, by the oldest law there is, and this thing eats them before they can become endings at all, and it leaves me nothing to collect. It is not death, it is the murder of death." She rose and turned, and her eyes were bright with a fury that had nothing performed in it. "I have spent my whole existence being told I am the goddess of death and being denied the throne that title deserves. And here, at last, is a thing that genuinely threatens death itself, not the dramatic, collectible death I preside over, but the very concept, and you are the only power in creation who has even noticed." Diana, by the door, shifted. "She is right," she said, and there was a new note in her voice too, the note of a strategist who has just watched an unexpected ally walk onto the field. "I called it a riddle wearing a war's clothing. She has named what the riddle costs. It does not merely end worlds, it ends the ending of worlds. It unmakes the order that you, Hela, embody, and that I in my way was made to defend. We are not natural allies, you and I." She said it without rancor, a simple statement of the terrain. "But I do not need to like a soldier to want her in the line beside me when the line is this one." Hela looked at the Amazon for a long moment, and something complicated moved across her face. The reluctant, almost painful recalibration of a woman who has just been offered a place in a line by someone she had every intention of despising. "You want me in your line," she repeated. "I want everything that can fight in the line," Diana said. "I am a soldier. I do not have the luxury of vanity about my company when the enemy is the death of death. If you can hold a flank, I will stand beside you, and we may loathe each other afterward at our leisure, when there is still an afterward to loathe each other in." The narrator pauses here to observe that this, and not anything Harry said, was the moment Hela began to stay for real, not because the king had charmed her, though he had unsettled her considerably, but because the guard at the door had offered her a thing she wanted more than thrones and had never once been offered in all her covetous ages. Not worship, not fear, not even desire, but a place in a line that mattered, the dignity of being needed by a worthy comrade for a worthy fight. Hela had been wanted for her beauty and feared for her power and used for her ambition. She had never, until an Amazon said it across a gallery at the end of all things, been simply recruited. "I have not agreed to anything," Hela announced to the gallery at large, which the narrator records as the precise sound a proud creature makes in the instant after it has, in every way that matters, agreed to everything. "I am considering. There is a difference." "There is," Harry agreed gravely and did not smile, though the effort of not smiling was visible to Diana, who was beginning to learn to read him and found the reading more entertaining than she would admit. It was at this point that the lady at the end of things arrived, and the temperature of the entire affair changed. She did not come on corpse fire or across a sea. She was simply present at the edge of the gallery. In the soft blue light she wore like a habit, and she was looking at Hela, and Hela was looking at her, in the air between the two of them, between the small theatrical goddess who styled herself Death and the vast quiet entity who actually was an aspect of it, developed a charge that made even Harry sit up. "Hello, Hela," said the lady pleasantly, and the pleasantness had an edge filed into it so fine you could have shaved with it. Still wearing the title. "It suits you, it's a lovely costume." Hela's spine went rigid. The narrator must explain, for the audience's benefit, that there is no insult in all the realms more wounding to Hela than the suggestion that her divinity is a costume, that she plays at being death while the genuine article goes about its business elsewhere, uninterested in her theater. It was the true thing under the throne, the wound Harry had pointed at and declined to open, and the lady had just opened it, casually in passing, the way one flicks a speck from one's sleeve. "You," Hela said, and her voice had dropped into a register Diana had not yet heard from her, low and venomous, and beneath the venom, afraid. "You always did enjoy reminding me of my place. The little goddess with the borrowed name. Come to gloat, have you, now that there is a real prize on the table and you mean to take it as you take everything, quietly, inevitably, without even the courtesy of a fight?" "I came," said the lady unruffled, "to see whether you would behave." You're behaving better than I expected, which I'll admit disappoints me a little. I'd half hoped you'd give Diana an excuse. She turned her gaze then to Harry, and the edge went out of it, replaced by something more guarded. And the narrator notes that Harry, watching the two death women circle each other, had just learned something he had not known and that the lady had plainly not wished him to learn. That whatever the lady was, she and Hela had a history, and it was old, and it was raw, and the lady was not nearly so serene about Hela as she was about everything else in creation. You let her stay, the lady said to Harry, and it was not quite a question. I let her decide whether to stay, Harry said carefully. He had registered everything, the charge, the wound, the lady's uncharacteristic edge. And he was, the narrator observes, doing arithmetic, the rapid private arithmetic of a man who has just discovered that the woman he is quietly half in love with has a rivalry he did not know about with the woman who just walked into his house, and who is trying to decide how much of what he is feeling he is allowed to feel, given that he has promised everyone, including himself, that no one in this gallery will be owned. Same as I let Diana decide, same as I'll let you decide when you decide what you're deciding. The rule's the rule. It doesn't have exceptions, and it especially doesn't have an exception for the parts of it that are inconvenient for me. He looked at the lady steadily, including the part where I don't get to want any of you more than you want to be here. That part's the rule too. I made it before you told me to. I'm keeping it even now that keeping it is going to cost me something. The lady at the end of things went very still. It was a different stillness than Hela's predatory crouch. It was the stillness of a being who has just been handed, by the one person she had not expected it from, the exact thing she had warned him to give to everyone else, and who is realizing with the slow vertigo of the genuinely surprised that she did not actually want it applied to herself. She had told him to win his court the slow way, the way that could fail. She had not anticipated that he would apply the principle to her, that he would refuse to want her more than she chose to be wanted, that he would, in the name of the rule she had given him, hold a door open for her too. And she found, she who had buried every grasping thing in all of history, that an open door, held by a man who genuinely meant to let her walk back out of it, was the single most disarming thing that had happened to her in the whole unspooling of forever. That, she said at last very quietly, was not what I meant when I gave you that advice. I know, Harry said. But it was true when you said it, and it's still true now, and I don't think you get to take it back just because it turned out to point at you. A corner of his mouth moved. You made the contest fair. You don't get to be annoyed that it's fair in your direction too. For a while the gallery held 3 women and 1 king, and a quantity of unspoken arithmetic that would have flattened a lesser architecture. And the narrator is pleased to report that nobody did anything dramatic about it, because the most adult thing in all of literature, rarer than any monster, harder to write than any war, is the scene in which powerful people who want incompatible things choose, for the moment, to simply let the wanting sit in the room unresolved, and get on with the work. They got on with the work. The lady, mastering herself, laid out what little she knew of the warm dark, that it was old, older than her tenure, which was saying a great deal, that it had been quiescent for an age and had lately begun to wake, and that she suspected, though she could not prove, that something had woken it, which meant there was a hand behind the hunger, and a hand could be found, and a hand could be answered. Hela contributed the cold logistics of how the dark fed and what it left, which was nothing. Diana contributed the strategist's frame, mapping the rim of the absence, noting the rate of its advance, calculating grimly, precisely, how long the layered skies had before the eating reached the inhabited heart of things. The answer was, longer than a mortal lifetime, shorter than a god's patience. There was time. There was not so much time that one could afford to spend it circling one's rivals in a gallery, and all 4 of them knew it. And the knowing imposed a discipline on the unspoken arithmetic that no amount of goodwill could have. And Harry, in his chair, listened and synthesized, and felt, beneath the strategy and the tension and the slow, dangerous warmth of being in a room with 3 extraordinary women who had each, in her own way, declined to leave, a thing he had not felt since the hour of his ascension, since before the chair and the skies and the whole enormous loneliness of being the only one of his kind. He felt the beginnings of a court, not a court of kneelers. A court of people who had walked in armed and stayed standing and started, despite themselves, to work the same problem from their different and incompatible angles. It was the thing he had wanted and not known how to ask for. It had assembled itself out of provings and refusals, and one Amazon's blunt recruitment of a goddess she intended to loathe. And it was, the narrator judges, the first genuinely good thing the new god had built, precisely because he had built almost none of it on purpose. The lady was the last to leave that long first council, and she lingered after Hela had prowled off to inspect the gallery's farther frames and Diana had gone at last, to harbor her vessel and send her word home. She stood by Harry's chair and she did not say anything for a while, and Harry did not fill the silence, having learned that her silences were where she kept the things she had not decided whether to give him. You should know, she said finally, that Hela and I are going to be difficult. The two of us in the same court, there's a history. I won't tell it to you tonight. Some of it isn't mine to tell, and some of it I'm not ready to. But it's old and it's not finished, and you've just put us under the same roof, and the roof is the end of all things, and you should go in with your eyes open. She paused. I could have told you not to let her stay. You'd have listened. Why didn't I? Because you don't actually want me to manage you, Harry said. Either of you, any of you. You want me to be the kind of man who wouldn't, even when it would be easier, even when it would spare everyone a lot of difficulty. You'd think less of me if I started arranging my court for my own comfort, and you'd be right to, and you'd leave, and you'd be right to do that too. He looked up at her. You're not testing whether I can keep the peace, lady. You're testing whether I'll keep the rule when the rule is expensive. So far it's been cheap. It's about to get expensive. I think you wanted to watch. The lady at the end of things looked at the king of all things for a long moment. In the soft blue light she carried at the end of the first day of the rest of forever, and she did the most dangerous thing she had done yet, which was to smile at him without any edge in it at all. Ask me again, she said, what I want. Someday, not today, but the answer's getting shorter, Harry. It used to take me a very long time to say. Lately it's down to almost nothing. And she was gone before he could ask whether that was a warning or a gift, leaving him alone in the gallery with a kindling court, a waking dark, and a new and complicating warmth, none of which he reflected had come with instructions. Diana found Harry alone after the lady had gone in the quiet that follows a room full of charged history emptying out, and she did not pretend she had not seen what she had seen. There is a thing between those two, she said, planting her spear and leaning on it, the warrior at rest but never quite off duty, the lady and the antlered one. Old and raw and unfinished, and you have just put them under the same roof, and the roof is the end of all things. As your guard, I am obliged to tell you that this is a tactical error of the first order. As she paused, choosing the word with the care of a woman who did not waste them, as whatever else I am becoming to you, I am obliged to tell you that you did it anyway because it was right, and that being right and being wise are not always the same thing, and that you will need to learn the difference or it will be the death of your court long before any dark at the edge of creation gets the chance. I know, Harry said. I felt at the moment they looked at each other. I could have told Hela to go, the lady half wanted me to. He looked at the Amazon. But the rule's the rule. If I start arranging the court for my own peace, I'm managing people, and you'll leave, and you'll be right too. The lady's testing whether I'll keep the rule when it's expensive. It just got expensive. I'm keeping it. Diana studied him for a long moment, and something in the studying softened by the smallest degree into approval, the wary approval of a woman who had crossed a sea to weigh a tyrant and kept finding, against her training, a man who passed each weighing. You understand that I will hold you to that, she said. When the expense comes due, and it will with those two in the same court, it will come due in blood or in tears or in some ending none of us sees coming. I will be watching to see whether you keep the rule or break it for comfort. That is the post you hired me for. I intend to be very good at it. She inclined her head, the soldier's nod that was not a kneel. For what it is worth, king of the cupboard, most men would have sent her away. The sending away would have looked like strength and been weakness. You kept the door open, and it looks like recklessness, and is, I think, the only strength that will survive what is coming. Do not let it go to your head. Reckless rightness is still recklessness, and I will say so loudly every time. I'd be disappointed if you didn't, Harry said, and the dry thing flickered between them, and Diana almost smiled, and chose, with 3,000 years of discipline, to plant her spear a fraction harder instead, and went to walk the perimeter of a house that did not need walking, because walking it was how she loved a thing, and she had not yet admitted even to herself how many things in this gallery she had begun to love. He went down to a world that night, though there were no nights in the gallery, and that night is only the narrator's concession to the reader's need for the comfort of clocks, because the lady's word had lodged in him and he could not stop turning it. Costume. She had said it to wound Hela, and it had wounded Hela, but it had also, in the indirect way that truths spoken to one person ricochet into another, lodged in Harry, who was after all wearing the largest costume in all creation and had spent the day insisting to a series of magnificent women that the costume was not the man inside it. He wanted to see, with his own attention rather than his omniscience, what a borrowed crown looked like worn by someone who knew it was borrowed. And the gallery, courteous, had shown him where to look, a world beneath a sky that one woman personally maintained, where the rains came when she called, and the people had built her a temple she had never asked for and could not talk them out of. He arrived in the form of a man, an ordinary traveler, dust on his sandals, because a god who visits a temple as a god learns nothing. The worshippers perform, the air goes thick with awe, and the truth hides behind the incense. He arrived as a stranger at the back of a gathering, and he watched Aurora Munro end a drought. She did it without spectacle, which surprised him. He had expected, after Hela, a certain amount of theater, and there was none. She stood in a cracked field before a crowd that had walked for days to reach her. And she lifted one hand, not high, just to the height of an offered palm, and she closed her eyes. And the narrator wishes to record that what Harry felt in that moment was not the operation of a goddess but the labor of a woman, a real exertion, a reaching out into the high cold places of the atmosphere, a gathering of scattered moisture across 1,000 miles into the slow architecture of a cloud, performed with the focus, sweating, entirely mortal effort of a craftsman at a difficult task. The rain came. It came gently at first, and then with the generosity of a long withholding finally released, and the cracked field drank, and the crowd wept and sang and fell to its knees, and Aurora Munro opened her eyes and looked at the kneeling crowd with an expression Harry recognized instantly, because he had worn it himself not a day before in a broken chapel. It was the expression of someone being knelt to who does not believe she deserves it, and cannot say so, because the people need the kneeling more than she needs to be honest. He waited until the crowd had dispersed to its singing and its feasting, until the goddess had slipped away from her own worship, the way the genuinely tired slip away from a party, and he found her at the edge of the rain-dark field alone, sitting on a stone with her storm-cloud hair loose around her shoulders, and her divine composure set down beside her like a heavy coat at the end of a long day. She did not look like a goddess. She looked like a woman who had just done something difficult and was allowing herself in the privacy of the dusk to be tired about it. "That was kind," Harry said, settling onto the stone beside her with the ease of a fellow traveler. "What you did. And it cost you." They didn't see the cost. They saw a goddess wave her hand. "I saw a woman move 1,000 miles of cloud by hand because the alternative was watching them starve." Aurora did not startle. She turned her head and looked at the stranger who had seen the thing the crowd had not, and something in her recognized something in him, the way one tired professional recognizes another across a room full of amateurs. "You are not from here," she observed. Her voice was low and even and carried the particular dignity of a person who has decided, long ago, never to raise it. "And you are not what you appear. The dust on your sandals is very convincing. It is also very new." A man who had truly walked here would have older dust. A faint movement at the corner of her mouth. "You are the new weight, the genuine article. I felt you arrive 3 days ago and resolved to come and look upon you, and here you are looking upon me first. I am not certain whether to be flattered or unnerved." "Both, probably," Harry said. "I'd recommend both." "I came because someone called what I'm wearing a costume, and she was right, and I wanted to see how it's done by someone who knows the costume's a costume and wears it anyway because the people need it. You're better at it than I am. I've had the job a day, and I already nearly abolished rain on a world out of squeamishness. You've been moving clouds by hand for years, and you still slip away to be tired about it where they can't see. That's the part they never put in the temples, the slipping away, the being tired, the not believing you deserve it." He looked out at the rain-dark field. "I wanted to meet the woman who does the slipping away, not the goddess in the temple. I've met enough goddesses this week. They're exhausting, present company hopefully accepted." Aurora Munro laughed, low and surprised, and the rain, responsive to her always, eased by a degree as though the sky itself had relaxed with her. "You came to a temple to escape goddesses," she said. "That is either very foolish or very lonely. I have not decided which." She studied him in the failing light. "You wear the largest power in all creation, and you slipped away from it to sit on a wet stone with a woman who is tired, because you wish to be seen as the man and not the weight. I know that wish. I have worn it every day of my divinity. The people kneel to the weather, and I am only the woman who carries it, and there is no one, not in all my world, who looks at the woman and not the weather. Until it would seem a stranger with new dust on old sandals." She was quiet a moment. "What is it that you want from me? Wait, that wishes to be a man? They always want something, even the gentle ones, especially the gentle ones." "Nothing you have to give," Harry said. "That's the honest answer, and it's the one nobody believes, so let me make it concrete. I'm not here to recruit you, though I'll tell you there's a thing eating the edge of creation and a small strange court forming to face it, and you'd be welcome in it, and you'd be good in it. And I think you'd find people there who finally look at the woman and not the weather, because they all carry costumes of their own and they know what it costs. But I'm not here to ask you for that tonight. Tonight I just wanted to sit with someone who understands the slipping away, because I've been the genuine article for a day and I'm finding it lonelier than anyone warned me, and you're the first person I've met who carries the same particular tiredness. That's all. If you want to come and look at the court, the door's open and an Amazon will hold it. If you want to stay here and move your clouds and be tired in private, that's a good life and I won't say a word against it. I came down to learn how you wear the costume. I'm not going to repay the lesson by trying to take you out of it." The rain fell. Far off, the worshippers sang. And Aurora Munro, who had been wanted for her weather by everyone who had ever knelt to her, sat on a wet stone in the dusk beside a man who had come a long way to want nothing from her but her company, and found that the costume sat lighter on her shoulders than it had in years. "I will think about your court," she said at last. "I make no promises. My world needs its reign, and a goddess who abandons her people for a king's gallery is no goddess at all, only a woman who liked being looked at by someone new." She turned to him, and her composure had returned, but it was a warmer composure now, the composure of a woman who has chosen to extend it rather than the armor of one who has nothing else. "But I will think about it. And I will tell you a thing for free. Wait, that wishes to be a man, because you gave me an hour of being seen and asked for nothing. Whatever eats your creation, it will not be stopped by power. I know power. I carry a great deal of it, borrowed though it is. Power moves clouds and ends droughts and frightens kings. It does not mend the thing that is broken at the root of the world. Only care does that, and care is not a power. It is a labor. It is the slipping away done for someone else every day when no one is watching and no one kneels." She rose and gathered her storm cloud hair, and the woman became by degrees the goddess again, ready to return to her temple and her tired, generous work. "You already know this. I can see that you know it. I only wish to be the one who said it to you, so that when the time comes and you do the thing only care can do, you will remember that a tired woman on a wet stone told you it was possible." She left him there, and the rain saw her home, and Harry sat alone on the stone in a borrowed dusk and understood that he had come down to learn how to wear a costume and had instead been handed, by a weather goddess who asked for nothing, the second true clue about the thing at the edge of everything. Diana had told him it was a riddle, not a war. Aurora had told him the answer would be care, not power. He turned the two clues over together, and they fit, the way two halves of a broken thing fit, and he sat with the fitting for a long while before he rose and stepped back up into the gallery of all things, where a goddess of death was prowling his frames and an aspect of death itself had left him a riddle of her own, and where the work he understood was only beginning. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4, The Maker and the Magician. Court, the narrator has observed across the long study of courts, is not made by the king who sits at its center, but by the rituals the courtiers invent to bear each other's company. And the court of the king of all things invented its first ritual within a span that, translated into the clumsy arithmetic of days, was about a week. The ritual was this, that they gathered, the four of them, in the gallery, before the corner where the warm dark ate inward, and they looked at it together, and they argued. The arguing was the ritual. Diana argued like a general, in lines and flanks and rates of advance. Hela argued like a coroner, in what was taken and what was left and the precise abomination of the leaving. The lady argued rarely and briefly, and with the weight of someone who had been present for things the others had only inferred. And Harry argued least of all, because he had discovered that his role was not to win the argument, but to hold the room in which the argument could happen, which is the hardest and least visible labor a sovereign performs, and the one for which sovereigns are least often thanked. It was into this ritual mid-argument that the fifth member of the court arrived, and she did not announce herself with corpse fire or a spear or the soft blue weight of an ending. She arrived as a change in the quality of the light, a sudden richness, as though the gallery had been a sketch and someone had begun, very quietly, to paint it. The frames of the layered worlds grew more saturated. The knot ground underfoot acquired a grain, a warmth, the suggestion of fine old wood. And in the center of the new richness stood a woman regarding the warm dark with her head tilted and her arms folded and an expression of pure, undisguised professional fascination, the way a restorer regards a damaged masterwork. "Oh," said Circe to the dark with feeling. "Oh, you poor ugly thing, who let you happen?" The court turned. The woman did not appear to notice that she had interrupted anything. She had the magnificent self-possession of a being so old that the rudeness of arriving uninvited had stopped occurring to her several civilizations ago. She was an eternal. The narrator supplies this for the audience, since she would never trouble to supply it herself. One of the deathless makers who had walked the world since before most of the worlds had finished cooling, and she had spent that immeasurable span doing the one thing she loved, which was rearranging matter into more beautiful configurations than it had managed on its own. She could turn stone to water and water to wine and a battlefield to a meadow, not by destroying and remaking but by persuading the matter itself that it had always wished to be the lovelier thing. She was in the deepest sense an artist, and she had felt the new weight arrive the way an artist feels a new color enter the world, and she had come eventually in her own unhurried time because she wanted to see it. "You're Circe," Harry said. He had risen from his chair. He rose for her. The narrator notes, which he had not done for Hela, some quality of her undefended curiosity earned it. Diana said a maker of beautiful things would come. Curious, she said, very old. Diana exaggerates nothing and underdescribes everything. It is her great failing as a poet and her great virtue as a soldier, said Circe without taking her eyes off the dark. Yes, I am Circe, I make things lovelier. It is the only thing I have ever wanted to do and the only thing I have ever been good at, and I have done it for so long that I have forgot how to want anything else, which my fellows consider a flaw and I consider a mercy. She finally turned from the dark to look at Harry, and her gaze was warm and frank and entirely unawed, the gaze of a woman who had met every kind of power and found most of it tediously unbeautiful. I did not come to court you, before you wonder. I am sure you are very courtable. You have a kind face and a dangerous quiet and 3 formidable women already arranged around you like a still life, and I am sure the storytellers are beside themselves. I came because of that. She pointed at the dark. It is the ugliest thing I have ever seen, not evil, ugly. It is an absence where there should be arrangement, and I have spent my whole existence turning absence into arrangement, and I find that I cannot stand to leave it like that. I came to see whether it could be made beautiful, or, failing that, whether it could be made to stop. And, said Hela, who had taken an immediate and territorial interest in the newcomer, as she took an interest in anything that threatened to be more interesting than herself. You have looked at it. You are the great maker. Can you rearrange it? Circe turned back to the dark and considered it with the long patience of her kind, and the court waited, and even the lady leaned in, because here at last was a being whose entire nature was the transformation of one thing into another. And if anyone could find the seam in the unseamed, it would be a woman who had spent eternity finding seams. At length Circe exhaled, and the saturation went a little out of the gallery, the way color drains from the face of someone who has seen something they did not expect. No, she said, and that frightens me, and I have not been frightened in a length of time I decline to specify because it would make the rest of you feel young. I rearrange matter by speaking to it, by reminding it of what it could be, of the lovelier arrangement latent inside it, and persuading it to become that. Everything in all creation can be spoken to this way, because everything is, at bottom, an arrangement, and arrangements can be coaxed into other arrangements. That is the deepest law I know. She gestured at the dark, and her hand, the narrator notes, was not quite steady. This cannot be spoken to. It is not an arrangement. It is the absence of arrangement, the unthing, the place where the lovely latent possibilities have been eaten before they could become anything. I reached into it to remind it of what it could be, and there was nothing in it to remind. It is no could be, it is pure has been undone. She lowered her hand. I came to make it beautiful. I cannot. There is nothing there to make beautiful with. And so I am going to stay and help you make it stop, because a universe with that in it is a universe with an ugliness I cannot bear, and I have learned over a very long time that the things I cannot bear are the things I am for. Welcome to the court, Harry said. Diana keeps the door. The rule is you can leave whenever you like and you never kneel. I suspect you'll find both of those easy. I have not knelt to anything since the 3rd dynasty of a people you have never heard of, and I left it because the architecture grew derivative, Circe agreed. Your rule and I will get along splendidly. It was a measure of how quickly the court was learning its own rhythm that nobody remarked on the addition, that Circe simply folded herself into the ongoing argument like someone who had always been part of it, contributing the maker's perspective that none of the others could have supplied, that the dark was not, as they had been half assuming, a force or a being, but a kind of anti-craft, a method, and that methods have practitioners, and that the question was therefore not what is it, but who is doing it. The hand behind the hunger, the lady had suspected it. Circe, who understood making from the inside, was nearly certain of it. Something was not merely letting the dark eat. Something was directing the eating, choosing its courses, steering the absence away from regions it wished to preserve and toward regions it was willing to spend. It eats in a pattern, Circe said, tracing the rim of the absence with a fingertip that left a faint trail of beauty in the air, a habit she could no more suppress than breathing. Look, it does not eat outward evenly the way a true mindless hunger would. It eats here and not here, and the not here is always the better arranged region, the more beautiful world, the one a connoisseur would wish to keep. Someone is curating it. Someone is feeding it the ugly worlds and the poor worlds and the worlds nobody important will miss, and steering it away from the jewels, and the only reason to do that, her voice dropped and the gallery dimmed with it, is that someone has made a bargain with it. Someone is keeping it fed so that it will not eat what they treasure. Someone has been paying the monster in worlds for a very long time to leave their own collection alone. The silence that followed this was the silence of 5 powers arriving, by different roads, at the same cold conclusion at the same moment. Sovrano, Harry said. The name sat in the gallery like a stone dropped in a still pool, and the rings of it spread outward through the assembled court, and each of them received it differently. Diana received it as a strategist receives the name of an enemy's general, with a grim clarification, the relief of finally having a face to aim at. Hela received it with a connoisseur's disgust, because she had spent her existence in the honest trade of endings, and the notion of a power feeding worlds to a monster to preserve its own comfort offended her professional ethics. Circe received it with the cold quiet of an artist who has identified a vandal. And the lady at the end of things received it with something the others did not see, because she had turned slightly away. A flicker of very old recognition, as though the name confirmed a thing she had feared and not said. The concordance of the eighth sphere, Harry said slowly, assembling it. He sent a herald to make me a vassal. I sent the herald back with his name. I thought he was just a tyrant, an old proud power who'd ruled his corner so long he couldn't imagine sharing the apex. But this is worse than tyranny. A tyrant rules. This is a man who's been buying his own survival with everyone else's. He's not the apex of creation because he's the strongest. He's the apex because he found the thing that eats everything, and he made a deal with it, and the deal is, eat them, not me, and I'll keep you fed forever. He was very still. Every world the dark has taken he chose. Every life it's revised out of being he spent to keep his concordance jeweled and safe. He's not a king. He's a man feeding his neighbors to the wolf at the door and calling the quiet that buys him peace. And now you have arrived, said the lady, turning back, her voice carefully level, and you are larger than him, and that ruins everything for him. Because as long as he was the apex, the bargain held, he was the strongest, so he chose the courses, so the dark ate by his curation and he stayed safe. But you outrank him now. You could end the bargain. You could refuse to let him spend the worlds. And the moment he cannot spend the worlds to feed the dark grows hungry, and a hungry dark does not respect old arrangements. She looked at Harry. He sent that herald to make you a vassal not out of pride, but out of terror. He needs you beneath him. He needs to be the one who chooses the courses, or his bargain collapses and the wolf turns on the keeper. You returning the herald with his name was the worst thing you could have done. You showed him you can't be ruled and can't be frightened and can't be bought. Which means from where Severano sits you are not a rival, you are the end of his deal. And a man who has fed worlds to a monster for eons to save himself will do a great deal, will spend a very great deal to keep his deal from ending. He will aim it, Diana said flatly. The strategist had run the line forward and seen where it terminated. If he cannot make you a vassal and he cannot make you afraid, he will do the only thing left to a man with a tame monster and a rival he cannot rule. He will stop steering the dark away from the worlds you love and start steering it toward them. He will make the cost of your defiance the things you cannot bear to lose. He will feed at your court, Harry, world by world and woman by woman, until you either kneel to restore the old bargain or watch everything you've gathered be revised out of being. She planted her spear. That is what I would do if I were a coward with a monster, and he has had eons to practice being exactly that. The gallery was quiet. The warm dark ate its patient inward inch. And Harry Potter, king of all things, looked at the corner of absence with a new understanding of it. Not a mindless hunger after all, but a hunger with a handler, a wolf with a keeper, a riddle wearing a war's clothing whose answer had just acquired a face and a name and a terrible, banal motive. Care not power, Aurora had said. He turned the clue again. The dark could not be fought with power, but the man feeding it, the man was not the dark. The man was a man. And men, even omnitir men who had ruled creation by appeasement for eons, had under their crowns the same small, frightened thing the herald had, the thing Harry had promised the lady he would not exploit and was beginning to suspect he would, before the end, have to understand. The sixth member of the court did not wait to be felt arriving. She announced herself because announcing herself was her trade, and she had decided long ago that a magician who slips quietly into a room has wasted the only advantage a magician has, which is the management of attention. There was a flourish of light at the edge of the gallery, stage light, warm and gold and entirely artificial, the light of 1,000 theaters distilled, and a woman stepped out of it as out of a wing onto a stage, in a tailcoat and a top hat, with the particular confidence of a person who has never once walked into a room she did not intend to own. She swept the hat off and bowed, low and theatrical, and when she straightened there was a playing card between her fingers that had not been there before. And she regarded the assembled court, the Amazon, the goddess of death, the eternal, the aspect of mortality, and the king of all things, with the bright, fearless, faintly mocking eyes of someone who had spent her life making the impossible look easy, and was not about to be impressed by a room full of people doing it the hard way. Zatanna Zatara, she said. Mistress of the mystic arts, headliner, daughter of the greatest magician who ever lived. And if the rumors crawling up from the lower spheres are to be believed, and I make my living knowing which rumors to believe, the only other person in this entire gallery who does magic the way I do magic, instead of by being born a goddess or a clay statue or whatever lovely arrangement the tall one is. She nodded at Circe, who inclined her head, charmed. Which makes you, she said, turning the full wattage of her attention on Harry, the most interesting man in all creation, and I have come a very long way and ducked a very large amount of cosmic nonsense to find out whether you're worth the trip. Most powerful men aren't. They get the power and they forget the craft. You can always tell they stop saying the words. They just wave a hand and reality rolls over. No artistry, no risk, no respect for the trick. She flicked the card and it became a dove, and the dove became a curl of smoke, and the smoke spelled briefly in the air, a word read backwards. So, king of everything, do you still say the words? Or have you gone the way of all the lazy gods, waving your hand and making the universe roll over like a bored dog? It was, the narrator observes, the most precisely aimed challenge anyone had yet put to Harry, because it went not to his power or his mercy or his throne, but to the thing underneath all of those, the thing he had been before he was a god. A boy who had learned magic, word by word and wand movement by wand movement, as a craft, as a discipline, as a thing you earned with study and risk and the willingness to be wrong. Zatanna had found, with a magician's instinct for the hidden lever, the one question that could make the king of all things feel, for an instant, like a student again. Harry was quiet for a moment. Then he lifted his hand and the court tensed, expecting the casual reality bending they had grown used to, and instead of waving it, he spoke. He said a word. An old word, a real one from the small magic of his small first world, the kind of word that did almost nothing, the kind of word a god had no possible need of, and at the word, a single teacup rose from beside his chair and drifted across the gallery and settled into Zatanna's free hand, steaming, prepared the way the gallery had divined she took it. He had used the largest power in creation to perform the smallest possible spell, by hand, with a word, the slow way, the way that could fail, because a magician had asked him whether he still respected the trick. I still say the words, Harry said, not because I have to. Because forgetting them is how you become the kind of god who waves his hand and makes the universe roll over, and I've met that kind of god this week, and he's feeding worlds to a monster to keep his furniture safe. The words are how you stay a craftsman instead of a force. The day I stop saying them is the day someone in this court should put a spear through me, and luckily, he glanced at Diana, I've hired the right woman for it. He looked back at Zatanna. Welcome. The door's held by an Amazon, you can leave whenever you like, and you never kneel. And yes, I'm worth the trip, but you knew that before you got here or you wouldn't have come. Magicians don't travel for maybes. Zatanna looked at the teacup in her hand, and at the man who had moved it with a word he did not need, and something in her sharp, bright face softened by a degree it did not often soften. Oh, she said, you're going to be a problem for me. She sipped the tea. It's perfect. Of course it's perfect, damn you. And she pulled up a chair that had not previously existed, the gallery providing it, and sat and joined the argument, and the court was 6. There was an interval before the attack came that the narrator insists on recording, because the chronicles of great matters tend to omit exactly this sort of thing and are the poorer and the falser for it. The court rested. The arguing wound down, as arguing does, into the lower and warmer register of people who have decided to trust each other a little, and the gallery, courteous as ever, dimmed its farther frames and warmed its near ones. And for a while the 6 powers and their king were simply a handful of remarkable people sharing a quiet hour at the end of all things. Zatanna did card tricks. She did them badly on purpose, fumbling the flourishes, letting the Queen of Hearts escape up her sleeve and reappear behind Circe's ear. And Circe, who could have rearranged the cards into a cathedral, laughed like a much younger woman and refused, with great dignity, to admit she was charmed. Diana told a story about throwing a god into the sea, and told it plainly without embellishment, which made it funnier than any embellishment could have. Even Hella unbent not far never far, but she let herself be drawn into a dry-running commentary on the relative incompetence of every king she had ever served. And the commentary was vicious and precise and very funny, and Harry laughed at it. And Hella noticed that he laughed and filed the noticing somewhere she did not examine too closely. And Harry, in the middle of it, set down for 1 hour the enormous weight of being the genuine article, and let himself be only a man in a room of people he was beginning to love. And the narrator names that emotion now, the one named feeling permitted in this chapter, because it is the load-bearing one and the story would be a lie without it. He loved them. Not yet each in the particular way the storytellers were already drawing, that was coming slowly, the way that could fail. But he loved the fact of them, loved that they had walked in armed and stayed standing, loved that they argued, loved that not one of them was afraid of him, which was a gift no amount of omnipotence could have purchased and which they had given him for free simply by being too large to be cowed. The lady found him at the edge of the warm hour, a little apart, watching the others the way a man watches a fire he is reluctant to leave. You're frightened, she observed. It was the first time anyone had said it to him, and she said it without alarm, the way she said everything as a fact among facts. A little, Harry admitted, not of Sovrano. Of the thing I'm going to have to do before this is over. The going in, the country you don't rule. He looked at her. I keep doing the brave version out loud because they need me to. But you asked me to win them the slow way, the way that could fail, and I think you should know that the man who's going to walk into the dark is the same man from the cupboard, and he's scared, and he's only doing it because there are people in this room he can't stand to watch me eat." He paused. "That's not the king talking, that's just me." I wanted one person to hear the just me version before the end. The lady at the end of things looked at him for a long moment in the warm dimmed light, and she did not soothe him because she had taught him better than to soothe, and she did not promise him it would be all right because she did not lie. She only reached out and straightened his collar the way she had in the broken chapel on the first day, the small domestic correction of a woman laying claim to the right to make it. "I heard it," she said. "I'll keep it. Now go back to your fire. They're better when you're in the room, and you've not got many warm hours left before the cold one." And he went, and the warm hour closed over him again, and the court did not know, watching their king return to the card tricks in the stories, that he had just shown the personification of death, the boy in the cupboard, and been given in return a straightened collar and the truest comfort she knew how to offer, which was simply to stay. Severano did not wait long to confirm everything the court had deduced, because the powerful, when frightened, mistake speed for strength, and Severano had been frightened since the day his herald came home renamed. The attack, when it came not against the gallery. Even Severano was not fool enough to bring a fight to the king of all things on the king's own ground, but against a world, a particular world. The gallery showed it to them all at once, the way a household hears a scream from a distant room. A frame among the layered skies that had, until that moment, been ordinary, lived in, full of the usual freight of small lives, beginning suddenly to curl at its edges. The warm dark which had been eating its patient inward inch at the far rim of creation had been given a new course. It had been aimed. And it had been aimed, with a cruelty so precise it could only have been chosen by a mind that understood exactly what it was doing, at the world beneath the sky that Aurora Munro personally maintained. "He's read the court," Hela said, and for once there was no theater in her, only the flat recognition of a fellow predator's strategy. "He knows you went down to her world. He's chosen the one you've already shown you care about, and he's chosen it first as a demonstration. He is teaching you the price of your defiance in a language he is certain you understand." Harry was already moving, not in body, for his body was a courtesy he wore in the gallery and not a thing he needed, but in attention, his whole vast awareness flooding toward the curling frame, toward the cracked fields and the temple and the millions of small lives and the one tired woman who moved clouds by hand. And he found arriving the thing he had dreaded since the hour of his ascension, that he could not simply stop it, the dark accepted force. He could feel the shape of the failure if he poured himself at the curling edge. He would feed it, and it would grow, and it would take Aurora's world faster, not slower, and her people with it. The largest power in all creation stood at the edge of a dying world and confronted, fully and for the first time, the precise limit Diana had named on the first day. It was a riddle, not a war, and he had brought, by reflex, a war's tools to it. "Harry," Aurora's voice. She had come up into the gallery, she had felt her own world begin to end, and rather than rush down into it to die with her people, she had come up because she was a strategist of weather and understood that you do not stand inside the storm you are trying to turn. Her composure was a terrible thing now, held by main force over a grief that would have drowned a lesser woman. "You cannot strike it. You know you cannot strike it. I told you, power does not mend the broken root. Do not feed it my world to spare yourself the helplessness of watching." "I'm not going to strike it," Harry said. "I'm going to do the other thing, the thing only care can do. I don't fully know how yet. But I know the shape of it now, and I know I haven't got time to learn it slowly, so I'm going to learn it fast and probably badly, and I need all of you." He turned to the court, the Amazon, the two death women, the maker, the magician, the weather goddess holding her grief like a held breath, and the narrator records that this was the moment the court stopped being 6 powers in a room and became a thing that could act as one. "Circe. You can't rearrange the dark, but you can rearrange everything around it. Buy me time, wall the world, slow the curl, give the people somewhere the eating hasn't reached yet. Satana. Your magic and mine are the same craft. I need a second caster who says the words, because what I'm about to try is too large for one voice and too precise for raw power. Diana, Hela, the dark has a handler, and a handler has agents, and the moment I start working, Severano will send something to stop me. Keep it off me. Lady," he turned to her last, and the thing in his voice when he turned to her was different, and everyone heard it and no one remarked on it. "The lives it's already taken, the ones revised out of being. You said they don't come to you. I need to know if that's true. I need to know if there's anything left of them to reach. Because if I'm going to do what I think I have to do, I have to know whether I'm saving them or only mourning them, and I can't know that without you." The lady at the end of things looked at him, and the soft blue light around her trembled, and she said very quietly, "If you do what I think you're about to do, Harry, you're going to reach into the place where the eaten things go, and I have spent the whole of forever keeping the living out of that place. If you go in, I cannot promise to bring you out. Even I have not been where the dark puts them. It is the one country I do not rule. She paused. Ask me anyway, you were always going to ask. Will you take me there? Harry said, if it comes to that. And the lady at the end of things, who had warned him not to win the proud ones by exposing them, who had made the contest fair and then been disarmed when he made it fair in her direction too, who had told him the answer to what she wanted was getting shorter, looked at the king of all things across the dying light of a curling world and gave him the shortest answer she had. Yes, she said. What followed, the narrator will attempt to render, though it occurred across scales and in registers for which mortal language was not designed, and the rendering will therefore be a translation, and like all translations it will be both true and a lie. Cersei went first, and she went down into the curling world the way a restorer goes at a damaged canvas, with terrible speed and terrible care. She could not touch the dark. But she could touch everything the dark had not yet reached, and she touched all of it at once, the cracked fields, the temple, the rivers, the rock, and she spoke to the matter of Aurora's world the oldest persuasion she knew, reminding it of what it could be, and what she reminded it to be was elsewhere. She did not stop the eating. She moved the meal. Whole provinces of the dying world lifted out of the path of the curl and rearranged themselves into refuge, the people upon them never feeling the motion, and the dark closed its mouth on rock where a moment before there had been a city, and found the city gone, transplanted into beauty a province over. And Cersei did this again and again, working backward from the rim, an artist erasing her own work just ahead of the Vandal's hand. Buying with exhaustion the one thing the king of all things had asked her for, which was time, and the agents came, as Diana had promised they would. Severano did not send the renamed herald, that one was lost to him, gone soft, gone human, no use for war. He sent the hallowed beings he had made the way he made everything, by taking and paring away, soldiers with their names and their fear and their mercy already eaten, so that nothing remained in them but obedience and edge. They came across the between space toward the working world in a tide, and they were terrible and they were many, and they had been built specifically to do the one thing that could ruin Harry's working, which was to break his concentration by making him watch people he could have saved die while he held himself to a task that forbade him from saving them. They did not reach him. They did not get close. Diana met the tide the way a breakwater meets the sea, and the narrator wishes it recorded that the Amazon, who had spent the chapter being a strategist, was in the press of actual battle, a thing of such joyous and total violence that even Hela beside her was briefly awed. She did not fight to kill, because the hallowed were victims as much as weapons. Pared down people wearing the shape of soldiers, she fought to disarm, to break the edge off them, to fold them harmless and set them aside. And she did it at a speed and with a precision that turned the tide into a problem of logistics and then into no problem at all. And Hela, who had come to the gallery to conquer a king, and stayed to be recruited by a guard, fought beside the Amazon with her corpse fire and her summoned legions, and discovered somewhere in the long green carnage that she was enjoying herself, and that the enjoyment had nothing to do with thrones, and that fighting for something besides someone was a pleasure she had been denied for eons by everyone who had only ever wanted to fight her. The two women held the line together, loathing each other exactly as much as they had agreed to, which by now was not very much at all, and shrinking, and behind their held line, the king of all things and the magician said the words. The narrator cannot transcribe the words because they were not in any one language, and because some of them were Harry's and some were Zatanna's, and the rest belonged to no one and rose up out of the working itself the way a melody rises from two instruments tuned to each other. But the shape of what they did can be told. They did not attack the dark. They reached past it, through the curl, through the eating, into the place behind the eating, the country the lady did not rule, the place where the eaten things went, and they did not try to take that place or break it or pour power into it. They knocked, that was all. Two craftsmen who said the words, knocking politely on the one door in all creation that had never been knocked on, because everyone who had ever reached it had come to force it and been swallowed, and no one in all the long appetite of the dark had ever once arrived asking permission to come in. Something answered. It was not a voice. It was the faintest possible easing, a hairline slackening in the curl of the dying world, the way a clenched hand loosens by a single degree when someone unexpected speaks to it gently. The eating slowed. Only for a moment, only by a fraction, but Harry felt it, and Zatanna felt it, and the two of them, sweat standing on their brows from the labor of saying the words at a scale that should have unmade them both, looked at each other across the working with the wild shared joy of magicians who have just watched an impossible trick begin against all odds to work. It hurt us, Zatanna breathed. There's something in there, behind the mouth. The mouth is just the mouth. There's something behind it, and it heard us knock, and then Sovrano arrived and slammed the door. He did not come as the herald had come, with trumpets and rose light. He came as a pressure, a vast cold correcting weight, the apex of creation descending on the working with the full authority of his eons. And where Harry's power was a held ocean and the lady's was a soft blue ending, Sovrano's was a closed fist, the power of a being who had ruled by appeasement so long that ruling and appeasement had fused in him into a single reflex, the management of everything, the permission of nothing. He reached into the working and he severed it, cut the knock off mid-sound, and the hairline easing in the dark slammed shut, and the curl resumed its eating, and Aurora Munro made a sound that the narrator declines to transcribe. Enough! Sovrano's voice was everywhere in the gallery, in the between space, in the bones of the working world. He had no single location, he was the concordance, and the concordance was vast. You meddling, sentimental child, do you understand what you were doing? Do you understand what you were about to wake? For 10 million years I have kept that thing asleep at the table, fed and sated and incurious. And you come, you infant, you accident, and you knock on its door, you invite it to notice that there is a behind to its mouth, you stir the one thing in all creation that must never, ever be made curious. I have spent eternities being the most hated necessary thing that ever lived so that creation could go on existing, and I will not watch you undo it in an afternoon to soothe your own tender conscience. The cold weight pressed down. Here are my terms, king of nothing, and they are the last I will offer. Kneel, take your place beneath me. Restore the bargain, let me choose the courses, let me feed the thing the worlds that can be spared. Let the apex be a single hand again as it must be. Do this, and I will steer the dark away from your little court and your tired weatherwoman's little world, and you may keep your gallery and your women and your illusions of mercy, as a vassal keeps his estate. Refuse, and the working world groaned as the curl accelerated, as Sovrano poured his own vast will into hastening the very eating he claimed to manage, a demonstration, a threat made flesh. And I will feed it everything you love slowly. In an order I will choose to maximize your education, beginning with this world, and I will make you watch. And when there is nothing left of your court but the watching, you will kneel anyway, having learned the lesson I learned 10 million years ago. That there is no mercy large enough to feed a hungry universe, and the only kindness a king can afford is the kindness of choosing who gets eaten. The court stood in the dying light, the battle stilled. The hollowed folded harmless and forgot, 6 powers and a king facing the apex of the old order, and the apex had made its offer. And the offer was the whole black logic of rule by fear distilled into a single demand, and everything Aurora's world, the knock on the door, the kindling court, the rest of forever, hung on what the king of all things would say. Harry looked at the curling world. He looked at Aurora holding her grief. He looked at the corner of the dark where, for one impossible moment, something behind the mouth had heard a polite knock and eased. And he looked last at the lady who had promised to take him to the country she did not rule, and who was watching him now with an expression that was no longer guarded at all. No, Harry said to the apex of creation, gently, the way he had said everything that mattered since the hour of his ascension. I'm not going to kneel, and I'm not going to let you feed anyone else to it, and I'm not going to fight you, because fighting you is what you want, and it's the same mistake as fighting the dark, it makes you bigger. I'm going to do the thing you've been too frightened to try for 10 million years. I'm going to find out what's behind the mouth. You've kept it asleep because you were afraid of what it would say if it woke. I think you've had it backwards the whole time, Sovrano. I don't think it's a monster you've been managing. I think it's a prisoner you've been feeding, so it would stay quiet, so you'd never have to learn what it was you locked away at the edge of everything and called a hunger. He turned from the apex deliberately, the profoundest insult one power can offer another, and faced the dark, and the court closed around him. I'm going to go knock again, and this time when it answers, I'm going to listen. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5, the price of the open hand. They saved most of the world, not all of it. The narrator sets this down plainly and early, because the chronicles of heroes have a vice of pretending that sufficient virtue buys a clean victory, and the truth, which Harry learned in the hours after Sovrano severed the working, is that there are afternoons when you do everything right and people die anyway. Circe had moved provinces out of the curl's path until her ancient strength ran thin as old cloth, and she had saved the temple and the singing crowds in the cracked fields that had so lately drunk their first rain in a year. But Sovrano in his demonstration had poured his own will into hastening the eating, and the eating had outrun even an Eternal's hands across the far hemisphere, and a quarter of Aurora Munro's world was simply no longer there. Not destroyed, not mourned, revised. The people of those provinces did not die, they had never been now, and the survivors in the saved hemisphere woke with a hole in their memories where a sister, a city, a song had been, and could not even grieve properly, because grief requires that you remember the shape of what is gone, and the dark had eaten the shape along with the rest. Ororo did not weep where the court could see. She went down into her saved hemisphere and walked among her people, and helped them carry water and rebuild walls and bury the bodies the eating had been too hasty to revise. And she did the labor that was the truest form of her care, the slipping away done for others. And only when the work was done and the people sleeping did she come back up into the gallery and stand before the corner of the dark and let her composure down alone in the dark light, for exactly as long as she judged she could afford. Harry found her there. He did not soothe her, he had learned. He stood beside her, the way she had taught him a god should stand beside a storm, at the edge and not inside it, and he said only, "A quarter because of me, because I knocked and he punished the knock." "A quarter," Ororo agreed, "and 3/4 because of you also." He would have eaten the whole of it eventually in his curation when my world's beauty no longer pleased his collection. You knocked and he punished the knock, and 1/4 was lost, and the door eased Harry. For a moment, the thing behind the mouth heard you, and the eating slowed, and a slowed eating is the first slowed eating in 10 million years. He has bought himself 10 million years of quiet by feeding it. You have bought us a moment of its attention by knocking. I have done the arithmetic a weather goddess does, the arithmetic of storms, of acceptable loss against turned catastrophe. She turned to him, and her composure, set down, revealed beneath it not the broken thing he had braced for, but something harder and cleaner. 1/4 of my world is the price of learning that the dark can be reached. It is a monstrous price. It is also the cheapest price anyone has paid for that knowledge in the history of creation, because everyone before you paid the whole of a world and learned nothing, having come to force the door. I will carry the 1/4. I have carried droughts. But you will not insult the dead by calling their loss only your fault, because that makes their deaths about your conscience, and they deserve better than to be a lesson in your humility. It was, the narrator observes, the hardest kindness anyone had yet done Harry, the refusal to let him take the whole weight, because taking the whole weight would have been its own quiet vanity, and he received it the way she had taught him to receive things, openly, without pressing. And the two of them stood at the edge of the dark in the dark light and did not soothe each other, and were, in the not soothing, more comforted than any soft word could have made them. The court took the loss of the quarter world differently, each according to her nature, and the narrator records the differences because a court is revealed not in its triumphs but in how it carries its dead. Hela took it as a ledger entry against Severano and said so bluntly in the council that followed. "He has shown us the shape of him," she said, pacing the gallery, her cloak of shadow trailing. "A man who feeds 1/4 of a world to a monster as a demonstration is a man who has done it 10,000 times before and felt nothing, and will do it 10,000 times again. I have served his kind. You do not reason with the kind who keep ledgers in lives. You do not appeal to the better thing in them, because they have spent it long ago and balanced the books, and the books came out in their favor, which is the only mathematics they respect." She stopped before Harry's chair. "You mean to go and speak to him? I can see it on you. Do not mistake me for a woman who will tell you it is hopeless. I have watched you do the impossible thing twice this week. But go in knowing what he is. He will wear exhaustion because the exhausted cannot be refused. He will speak of the hard arithmetic only he was brave enough to do. And every word of it will be true, and every word of it will be a cage, and the truest words are the strongest bars. Do not walk into his cage thinking your kindness is a key. Sometimes the door is only a door, and the only way through it is to refuse to enter." It was, the narrator notes, the most protective thing Hela had yet done, a warning offered not to wound but to arm, and Harry received it the way the court had learned to receive Hela's love, which arrived always dressed as warning or insult, because she had never been permitted any other costume for it. Diana took the loss as a strategist takes a defeat in the field. She studied it coldly for what it taught. "He heard us to teach us a lesson about cost," she said, "and the lesson he meant to teach is that defiance is expensive. But he taught a different one whether he meant to or not. He taught us that the dark can be aimed, which means it can be misaimed, which means his control of it is a thing that can be taken from him. A weapon with a handle has a place where the hand goes. We have only to reach it before he does." She turned the broken arithmetic of the quarter world into a map, the way she turned everything into a map, because a map was a thing you could act upon and grief was not, and the converting of grief into action was the particular labor of her courage. And Ororo, who had lost the most, said the least, and what she said was the gravest thing said in that council. "Do not avenge them," she told the court quietly when the talk had turned as talk does toward making Severano pay. "I have buried 1/4 of my people, and I am telling you who would avenge them out of love for me do not. Vengeance is force, and force feeds the thing that took them, and to spend my dead on a war that makes their killer's monster stronger is to kill them a second time. If you love me, do not avenge me. Mend the root, bring them home if they can be brought." And if they cannot, her composure held by main force over the drop beneath it, then let my grief be the last grief and not the first of 1,000 more. That is the only monument I will accept. Not Sovrano's ruin, the end of the eating, build me that. The council was quiet after that, because there is a kind of moral authority that silences a room, and it belongs not to the loudest or the strongest, but to the one who has paid the most and asks, even so, for mercy rather than blood. Harry looked at the weather goddess who had lost a quarter of her world and asked her court not to avenge it, and he understood that she had just handed him the conscience of the whole campaign, the standard he would have to meet at the bottom of everything. Mend the root, end the eating, and do not, whatever it costs, become a man who spends the dead on the satisfaction of the living. Harry went to Sovrano before he went into the dark. The court argued against it, Diana most fiercely, because a strategist does not parley with an enemy on the eve of a campaign, and Hela most dryly, because she had served enough tyrants to know what a tyrant does with an outstretched hand. But Harry went anyway alone into the concordance of the eighth sphere, because he had promised himself in the broken chapel that he would not become a man who fought when he could first understand, and because he suspected that the man feeding the dark was, in his own way, a door that had never been knocked on either. The concordance was beautiful. The narrator concedes this readily, because the beauty was the point and the horror of it. Sovrano had curated his sphere across 10 million years into a perfection that ached, every world a jewel, every civilization preserved at the apex of its flourishing, suffering trimmed away like a gardener trims a hedge, nothing permitted to decline or struggle or fail. It was the loveliest prison ever built, and its prisoners did not know they were imprisoned, because Sovrano had eaten the part of them that could imagine elsewhere, and they lived in their flawless, changeless jewels and called it paradise, and it was, in the way a painting of a feast is a feast. Sovrano received him in a hall at the center of it, and he had taken, for the meeting, the form of an old man, not frail, never frail, but old, deliberately old, a face full of the weight of 10 million years of dreadful arithmetic. And Harry understood that the form was chosen, that Sovrano had looked at his adversary's kindness and decided to meet it wearing exhaustion, because exhaustion is the one argument the kind cannot easily refuse. You came alone, Sovrano said. Sentiment or arrogance? Curiosity, Harry said, the same thing that's about to save creation if it saves it. I came to ask you one thing and then I'll go, not why, I know why. You found the dark eons ago and it was eating and you couldn't stop it and you discovered you could steer it. And you spent 10 million years steering it away from what you love and toward what you could bear to lose. And somewhere in there you stopped being a king and became a man who organizes the feeding of his neighbors to a wolf and calls it stewardship. I know all that. Here's my one question. He looked at the old man's face at the chosen exhaustion. When's the last time you knocked, not steered, not fed? Knocked, spoke to it like it might be someone. You've managed it for 10 million years, and I'd bet everything I am that in all that time you never once tried to find out what it was. Because the day you found out it was a someone and not a something, you'd have to stop feeding it people, and you couldn't bear to lose the bargain that keeps your jewels safe. You didn't keep it asleep to protect creation, Sovrano. You kept it asleep to protect yourself from knowing what you've been feeding. The old man's face did something then, a crack swiftly mastered, the same waver the herald's face had done on the first day, and the narrator notes that Harry saw the small frightened thing under Sovrano's crown rise up into the light, plain as anything, exactly as the lady had warned he would be able to see it, and that he could have spoken its name and broken the apex of the old order with a sentence. And he did not. He held it open-handed, the way Diana had taught him, the way he had held her wound and Hela's in his own, and he let Sovrano keep his crown, and he gave the fright thing nothing to flinch from, and that the refusal to press offered to the one being in all creation who least deserved and most needed it, was the cruelest mercy Harry had yet performed, because it left Sovrano entirely alone with the truth, holding it himself, with no enemy to blame for having spoken it. Get out, Sovrano whispered. The exhaustion was real now, no longer chosen. Get out of my sphere, you sanctimonious infant, before I forget that I have decided to be patient. You will fail. You will knock, and it will wake, and it will not be a someone, it will be the appetite at the bottom of everything. And it will eat you and your women and your gallery, and then unmanaged, unsteered, unfed in any order. It will eat the rest of creation in an afternoon, and the last thought of every living thing will be that a kind man killed them all because he could not bear to do the hard arithmetic that I have done alone for 10 million years. Get out. And when you are standing in the dark and it is eating you, you will understand at last that I was the only one who ever loved creation enough to damn myself for it. Maybe, Harry said, at the door of the beautiful prison. I might die in there, you might be right about all of it, but I noticed you didn't answer the question. He paused. You never knocked, 10 million years, and you never once knocked. I'm sorry, Sovrano, not for defying you, for that, for the 10 million years you spent so afraid of what you'd locked away that you fed at the universe rather than say hello. And he left the apex of the old order alone in his flawless, changeless hall, holding the truth no one had pressed on him, which is the one weight that cannot be set down, because there is no enemy at the other end of it to resent. He came back from the concordance changed, and the court read the change in him the way a crew reads weather in its captain's face. He told them all of it, the beautiful prison, the chosen exhaustion, the frightened thing under the apex's crown that he had seen and not pressed, the last accusation flung at his back, that a kind man would kill them all because he could not do the hard arithmetic. He told them because he had decided on the first day that a king who keeps secrets from the people who guard him is a king already halfway to becoming the thing they guard against, and he was not going to start sliding now, with the descent so close. Diana received the report standing, her arms folded, her strategist's mind already at work. "He is not wrong about the danger," she said when Harry had finished. "That is the trouble with the man. He is a monster, and he is also not entirely wrong, and the not entirely wrong is the most dangerous thing in this gallery, more dangerous than the dark, because it is the thing that will whisper to you in the country below when you are tired and frightened, and the door will not open. He has done a terrible arithmetic for 10 million years, and it has, by his lights, worked. Creation still exists, and he is the reason. When you are down there, and the someone behind the mouth will not answer, his voice is the voice you will hear. I cannot follow you in to silence it, so you must carry the answer to it with you already made before you go." She fixed him with the full weight of her regard. "What is your answer to him, Harry? Not the brave one for the court, the true one, the one you will need at the bottom." Harry was quiet for a moment. Hela watched him with her connoisseur's attention. Zatanna had stopped fidgeting with her cards. Even Cersei, still bright then, still fluent, held her endless small transformations still. "My answer," Harry said slowly, "is that his arithmetic worked the way a tourniquet works. It stopped the bleeding. It also killed the limb. He's kept creation alive for 10 million years by making it smaller and smaller, eating the poor worlds, the struggling worlds, the worlds that might have grown into something he couldn't predict, and calling the shrinking survival. He's right that he kept it existing. He's wrong that existing was the only thing worth keeping. A creation that survives by feeding its own strange edges to a wolf isn't being saved. It's being embalmed." He turned the universe into his concordance, beautiful, changeless suffering trimmed away, nothing allowed to fail or grow, and he called it stewardship, and the dark was always going to wake eventually, because you cannot feed a hunger forever. You can only choose whether you spend the delay learning to mend it or just postponing the bill. He looked at Diana. "That's my answer." He bought time and spent it on fear. "I'd rather spend whatever time we've got on the door, even if the door kills me. Because a man who will only act when the arithmetic is safe never knocks, and the not knocking is how you get 10 million years of quiet that ends, in one afternoon, in everything." "That," said Hela, with the flat approval she reserved for things that met her exacting and rarely met standards, "is an answer that will hold at the bottom. I have served the other kind of king, the kind whose answers dissolve the moment they are inconvenient, and I buried every one of them. Yours has bone in it." She uncoiled from where she had draped herself across a chair the gallery had grown for her. "Now, the logistics, since no one else in this sentimental room will speak them. When you go into the country below, you go into my trade, little king, even if it is the one province of my trade I have never been permitted to enter. The eaten are not dead, I have told you. They do not come to me, but they are kept the way the dead are kept, in a stillness, in a waiting, and a living mind in that stillness is a lamp in a dark house. Everything that has been waiting will turn toward it. You will not be alone down there. You will be surrounded, the instant you arrive, by everything the dark has ever swallowed, 10 million years of it, every revised world and edited life, all of them turning toward the one warm living thing that has ever come among them. They will not be hostile. That is the danger. They will be glad. They will want you to stay. And a man as full of care as you are, surrounded by 10 million years of the lonely waiting, all of them glad to see him." She let it hang. "You could lose yourself in the wanting to help long before you ever reach the door behind the mouth. The dark will not need to eat you. You will dissolve yourself into comforting them, the way the lady warned you could dissolve yourself comforting the living. Only there will be no Diana down there to put a spear in your face when you start to slip." The gallery was quiet. It was, the narrator observes, the most useful and least comfortable thing anyone had said to Harry in the whole of his reign, and it was Hela who said it, Hela who had come to conquer him and stayed to be recruited and was now, in her venomous loving way, the only one willing to name the precise shape of how he might fail. "Then give me something to hold," Harry said. "All of you, not advice, a thing. Something that's only one of you, that I can hold on to down there when the wanting to help starts pulling me apart, so that I remember I'm a person and not just a warmth for the lonely to gather around." And that, the narrator notes, was the seed of what Cersei would do at the very end of the coming battle, with the last fluent gesture left in her, the tokens, the piece of each carried by all, though none of them knew it yet, sitting in the blue-dimmed gallery on the eve of everything, learning from a goddess of death how a kind man drowns. There was a night before the descent. The gallery made one, sensing the need, dimming its frames to the deep blue of a held breath, and the narrator approaches it with a measure of discretion, because what passed among the court that night was theirs, and some of it belongs behind a closed door that the narrator intends to leave closed. What can be told is this. The women of the court had, over the preceding span, arrived at an understanding with one another, and they had arrived at it without Harry's involvement, which was precisely why it held. It was not the arrangement the storytellers of the lower spheres were busily inventing, the king on his throne dispensing his favor among rivals who schemed for his regard. It was stranger and more adult than that, and it had been brokered of all people by Diana, who had appointed herself the keeper of the door and decided that the door's first duty was to keep out exactly the poison the storytellers assumed. The jealousy, the scheming, the reduction of formidable women to suitors. "We are not rivals," she had told them in a council Harry was not invited to, "unless we consent to be made into rivals, and I have buried enough illusions to refuse that one. He does not rank us. He is incapable of ranking us. I have watched him try to be unfair and fail. So we will not rank ourselves for him, and we will not let him be the thing that divides us, because the day a man becomes the thing that divides women who might otherwise have been a court, is the day the man has won something none of us agreed to give." And the others had listened, Hela skeptically, Circe with an artist's appreciation for the architecture of the thing, the lady with a quiet that suggested she had been waiting a very long time for someone to say it aloud, and an understanding had formed, the terms of which were simple. That each of them chose freely, that no choice diminished another's, that the door swung both ways for all of them, and that the king would be loved, if he was loved, by women who remained entirely themselves and entirely each other's, and not by a court assembled to flatter him. So when the deep blue night came, it came on those terms, and the terms made all the difference. And the narrator will say only that Harry Potter, who had spent the first chapter of his godhood afraid that omnipotence had collapsed the distance between his desires and their fulfillment, discovered on the night before he walked into the country death, does not rule that the one thing his infinite power could not manufacture, and could only ever be given, was precisely this: to be chosen freely by people who could leave and did not. Of what passed with each of them, the narrator will give only the smallest true glimpse and then close the door, because the glimpses matter and the rest does not belong on a page. Diana came to him plainly, the way she did everything, having decided, and a woman who has decided does not dither at thresholds. She told him she had spent 3,000 years guarding things and had never once let herself be the thing somebody guarded, and that she did not intend to be guarded now either, but that she had discovered she could choose a man without surrendering her watch over him, and that the discovery had unbalanced every certainty she owned, and that she had decided to be unbalanced on purpose, for once, before the cold morning. She kissed him like a woman planting a standard on contested ground, claiming, not yielding, and the narrator closes the door there, and records only that the Amazon who had sworn never to kneel did not kneel and was not asked to, and found in the not asking the first thing in 3,000 years that had ever made her feel she was loved as a daughter is loved, helplessly, and not as a gift. Hela came to him as theater because theater was her armor, and stayed as something with the armor off, which she would deny to the end of all things, and which the narrator, being discreet, will permit her to deny. She had spent her existence being wanted for her beauty and feared for her power and used for her ambition, and she had built an entire self out of the conviction that this was all anyone would ever want of her, and she came to Harry expecting, beneath all her green-flamed performance, to be confirmed in it, and she was not. She was talked to. She was laughed with. She was at the last simply held by a man who found her interesting in the hour when she had stopped performing, and the goddess of death, who had never once in all her covetous ages been content, discovered contentment and was so affronted by it that she nearly left, and did not, and that not leaving was the truest thing she had ever done. Aurora did not come to him that night at all, and the narrator records this too, because it matters as much as the comings. She sent word, gentle and clear, that a quarter of her world was newly gone, and her grief was not a thing she would set down for a night's warmth, and that she would come to him when the grief had found its level and not before, and that he should not mistake her absence for refusal. It was the opposite, it was respect, the refusal to give him a hollow version of a thing she meant to give whole. And Harry sent back that he understood, and that the door swung both ways and would still be open whenever she was ready, and Aurora, alone with her dead, was comforted more by the waiting than she would have been by the warmth, because a man who will wait for the whole of a thing is rarer than any god. And Zatanna came to him and did not at first do anything but talk shop of all things, the craft, the words, two magicians comparing the small old spells of their two small first worlds. And somewhere in the comparing the talk turned, the way it does between people who have found in each other the one other person who speaks their private language, and the narrator closes that door as well, recording only that the mistress of the mystic arts, who managed attention for a living and never let a room see anything she had not chosen to show it, let the king of everything see her with all the flourishes set down, plain, unperformed, and that being seen plain by someone who could have looked anywhere in all creation was, she would later admit, the only trick that had ever genuinely surprised her. The lady at the end of things came to him last and stayed longest, and it is her the narrator will follow a little further before closing the final door, because she was the throughline, and because what she gave him was not what the others gave and could not be given what she was. "You're frightened," she said, as she had at the warm hour, but the gallery was darker now and the word landed differently. More than before. "You're about to walk into the one place I've spent the whole of forever keeping the living out of, and you've asked me to take you, and I said yes, and we've both been very careful not to talk about what yes costs." "What does it cost?" Harry said. "To take a living thing into the country where the eaten go," the lady said. "I have to do the thing I have never done. I have to let go of my own border. I keep the living out by being the border, by being the line they cannot cross while they still want to live. To carry you across, I have to stop being the line for as long as you're in there. And while I'm not the line," she looked at him steadily in the blue dark, "the door is open, both ways. Everything I've ever kept out can come in, and everything I've ever held can leave. And if you take too long in there, Harry, if you cannot find the thing behind the mouth fast enough, I may not be able to become the border again before something irreparable comes through. You are not the only one risking everything on this descent. You are risking yourself. I am risking the wall between the living and the dead. I wanted you to know that before tonight, so that whatever tonight is, it is not a thing you would have chosen differently if you had known the price." "Why are you helping me?" Harry said. "You keep skirting it." Diana noticed it the first day. "Why does death itself care whether one accidental god saves creation, and care enough to risk the wall between the living and the dead to do it? You've buried every grasping thing in history. You've watched 1,000 kings rise and fall and never lifted a finger. Why me?" The lady at the end of things was quiet for a long moment in the blue dark, and when she answered with the whole of it at last, the answer that had been getting shorter, the one she had told him to ask for someday. "Because in the whole of forever," she said, "you are the first thing that was ever glad to see me. Everyone else, every soul I have ever collected, every king and beggar and child and god, has met me with fear or bargaining or at best a tired resignation. I am the thing they spend their lives running from, and when I finally arrive, even the gentle ones flinch. And then you. A man who had died and come back more times than he could count, who opened a door I left open and walked through it and stood in a broken chapel and looked at me. Her voice did the thing it never did and caught just slightly, and was glad. Not relieved, not resigned. Glad the way you're glad to see a friend at a door. You asked me what I wanted. No one had ever asked. And I have spent the span since discovering that what I want, what I have wanted across the whole unbearable length of being the most feared thing in creation, is exactly that. To be met once by someone who is glad. You are the only one, that is why. It is the most selfish reason imaginable, and I am not ashamed of it. I have earned one selfish thing." And the narrator, who had intended to follow them no further, closes the door here as promised on what passed between the king of all things and the aspect of death who had waited the whole of forever to be met with gladness, save to record that the door, when it closed on warmth and on choice, and on two beings who had each spent their existence being the thing others fled, finding in each other the one face that did not flee, and that whatever the lower sphere storytellers imagined of that night, the truth of it was gentler and graver than their inventions, and was, like Diana's wound and Harry's cupboard, given under a law that punished pressing and held and not used. When the gallery brightened toward what passed for morning, the court assembled at the edge of the dark, and they were changed, all of them, in the way people are changed by a night that mattered, steadier and quieter, and bound to one another by something that the coming battle would test to its root. Hela stood beside Diana without insulting her, which from Hela was a love letter. Circe had spent the night not in dalliance but in work, and had made from the matter of the gallery itself 6 small tokens, a card, a spear charm, an antler shard, a sliver of storm glass, a quill of blue light, and for Harry a smooth gray stone like the one Aurora had sat upon, and she gave them out without ceremony, and said only, "So that whatever happens in there, each of you carries a piece of the rest. It is the oldest magic there is. It is also merely sentiment." I have stopped believing the two are different. And the court took the tokens, even Hela, who pretended to take hers ironically and was observed, later, to have kept it. It was at that assembled and tender moment, with the court bound and the descent prepared and the whole of them turned toward the dark, that Severano made his last attempt to stop them, and he made it the way frightened powerful things always make their last attempts, which is to say by aiming at exactly the bond they cannot understand and therefore most fear. He came against the gallery itself this time, the unforgivable trespass, the bringing of war to the king's own ground, and he came not with hollowed soldiers but with the dark, a great deliberate wave of it, steered with the full curatorial precision of 10 million years, aimed not at the worlds but at the gallery, at the house of all things, at the standing place where the court had made its tender bond. He had calculated, the narrator supposes, that Harry would have to choose, defend the gallery with force and feed the dark and make it grow, or hold to the no-force discipline, and watch his own house begin to be eaten. Either way, the descent would be ruined. Either way, Severano's bargain might yet be restored from the wreckage. He had not calculated on the court, because the court did not need Harry to choose, and the court did not fight the dark with force. They had all by now understood that lesson, but the court could fight Severano. And Severano, in steering the wave, had stretched himself thin across the between space, and a power stretched thin is a power with a flank, and Diana of the Messira had spent the whole campaign waiting for exactly one exposed flank. "Gio," she roared at Harry, already moving, already a streak of bronze and fury across the knot ground. "We hold the house, you find the door. Hela with me, his northern flank is open. Zatanna, the wave is a-working, it can be unworked. Say the word, Circe, hold the walls, move." And the court moved as one, the way they had learned to in the saving of Aurora's world, but better now, bound now, each carrying a piece of the rest. What followed was the great battle of the gallery, and the narrator will not stint it, but will compress it, because its meaning is simpler than its spectacle. Diana and Hela went up the stretched flank of the apex of creation like two blades finding the same gap. And they could not kill him, he was too vast, too old, too distributed. But they could hurt the parts of him that had reached too far, and they did gloriously, the Amazon and the goddess of death fighting back to back in a manner that the surviving frames of nearby worlds would remember for ages as a sign in their skies. Zatanna stood before the oncoming wave of dark and did the thing only a magician of her particular genius could do. She did not fight the wave, she revised the spell that aimed it, reaching into Severano's 10-million-year-old curation and saying the words backwards, unworking the steering, so that the wave, robbed of its aim, slewed wide and wild and harmless into the between space, a hunger with nowhere to bite. And Circe held the walls of the house of all things with the last of her ancient strength, reminding the gallery over and over of what it was, so that the parts the dark did graze remembered themselves and refused to be unmade. They won. But the winning cost, because Severano was the apex of creation, and even a stretched apex is a terrible thing, and the narrator must now record the price, because a victory without a price is a lie, and this story has promised not to lie. Circe held the walls too long. She held them past the point an eternal could hold and remain, because the alternative was letting the house fall and the descent fail, and the quarter of Aurora's world and all the eaten worlds before it have been spent for nothing. And at the end, when Zatanna had slewed the wave wide and Diana and Hela had driven Severano back into his concordance to nurse his stretched and wounded vastness, Circe the Maker, the oldest of them, the woman who turned absence into arrangement and could not bear an ugly thing, had spent so much of herself reminding the gallery what it was that she had forgotten at the last to remind herself. She did not die. The narrator is precise. She did not die because dying is a thing that leaves a soul for the lady to collect, and Circe did not leave one. She had given herself so wholly to the walls that when the battle ended she was simply diminished. Thinned, present but quiet, her saturation gone out of her, her tongue stilled, the endless beautiful chatter of the Maker fallen silent. She sat where she had held the wall, and she did not transform anything. And when Harry knelt before her, he knelt, the king of all things who had told everyone never to kneel, knelt to the Maker who had spent herself for his house. She looked at him with eyes that still knew him but could no longer find the words she had always had in such bright endless supply. And she lifted one hand and made with the last fluent gesture left in her, a single small beautiful thing in the air between them, a door. An open door. And then her hand fell and the Maker was quiet, and the court understood that Severano had taken from them not a life but something the dark itself trafficked in, a thing revised, a brilliance edited down toward absence, and that the price of the open hand had a face now, and the face was Circe's, silent, holding the memory of a door. The court gathered around the silent Maker, and grief moved among them, and the narrator notes that not one of them spoke of vengeance, because they had all learned by now that vengeance was force and force fed the thing they were fighting, and that the only answer to what had been done to Circe was the same answer as the answer to everything, to find the door behind the mouth and knock and listen and mend the broken root from which all the eating grew. "She made me a door," Harry said. He was still kneeling. He held the small, beautiful thing Circe had shaped, the open door hanging in the air, slowly fading the way her gestures faded now, right at the end, with the last of it. She didn't make a weapon or a wall or a curse on Sovrano. She made a door and she gave it to me, and I think his voice was very level, the way it went when the cupboard boy was holding something heavy. I think she was telling me how to bring her back, how to bring all of them back, the eaten ones, the provinces of Aurora's world, Circe's own brilliance. She spent her last words making me a door because she understood before any of us what I'm only understanding now, that the dark isn't a fire to be put out. It's a door that's been locked so long everyone forgot there was a someone on the other side of it, and the eaten things aren't destroyed. They're behind the door. In the country the lady doesn't rule, waiting for someone to knock and mean it. He rose. He turned to the lady at the end of things, who stood in her soft blue light beside the silent maker, and the whole of the court turned with him, and the deep blue night and the warmth and the bond and the price all gathered into the single moment at the edge of the dark. You said you'd take me, Harry said. You said it costs you the wall between the living and the dead for as long as I'm in there. You said if I take too long, something irreparable comes through. He looked at the silent maker, and at Diana with her notched spear, and at Helle who had kept her ironic token, and at Zatanna whose flourishing hands were burned from saying the words, and at Aurora who carried a quarter of a world. I'm not going to take too long. I'm going to go in and find the someone behind the mouth, and I'm going to do the thing Aurora told me only care can do, and I'm going to come back, and I'm going to bring the door open behind me so wide that everything the dark ever ate comes home. He held out his hand to the lady. Take me to the country you don't rule. And hold the door, all of you on this side, the way you held the house. I'll knock from the inside. When I do, open. The lady at the end of things looked at the king of all things, and at the court that had bound itself around him, and at the silent maker holding the memory of a door, and she did the thing she had spent the whole of forever never doing. She stopped being the border. She felt the wall between the living and the dead go soft at her own choosing, felt the cold country open at her back, felt everything she had ever held and everything she had ever kept out shiver at the unprecedented slackening. And she took the king of all things by the hand gladly, the way she had wanted across all of forever to be taken, and she stepped backward into the dark, and drew him with her out of the gallery, out of the light, out of the company of the court. Into the one place in all creation that no living thing had ever entered and returned from, where the eaten things waited behind a locked door, and where the answer to the riddle that wore a war's clothing had been sitting alone, in the dark, being misunderstood, for 10 million years. The court closed around the place where their king had been, and set their hands to the door and held. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. The country below the country where the eaten go has no proper name, because naming is an act of acknowledgement, and acknowledgement was the one thing that country had never received. And the narrator, who has been many places and declined to describe most of them, will make an exception here, because what Harry Potter found below the mouth of the dark is the hinge on which the whole of creation was about to turn. It was not dark. This was the first surprise, and it undid every expectation he had carried down. He had braced for an abyss, a void, a screaming nothing, and he stepped out of the lady's blue hand into a vast, soft, gray twilight, a country the color of the moment before dawn or the moment after dusk, neither both, a held threshold of a place that went on past every horizon without ever quite committing to a shape. And it was full. That was the second surprise, and the worst one. It was crowded. As far as his vast attention could reach in every direction, the gray twilight was populated by worlds, by cities, by people, by all the eaten things of 10 million years, none of them destroyed, all of them present, all of them waiting in a stillness so complete and so patient that it pressed on him like a held breath that had been held since before his own world's sun. And the instant he arrived, they turned toward him, not in menace. Helle had been right, and her rightness was the danger. They turned the way plants turn toward a window, the way the cold turn toward a fire, the way the lonely turn toward the sound of a door. A slow, vast, indrawn turning of 10 million years of waiting, orienting all at once on the single warm living thing that had ever come among them. He felt the turning as a pressure on every surface of his being, a wordless collective yearning so enormous and so undefended that it nearly took him apart on the spot, because every fiber of what he was the carrying that was his flaw and his glory, the boy from the cupboard who soothed strangers' griefs across 1,000 worlds, strained toward the waiting eaten, wanting to gather them all up, to comfort them, to be the warmth they had turned toward, and to keep being it forever. Until there was no Harry left, only a warmth dissolved among the lonely. He held the stone. It was the small gray token Circe had made him, the one shaped like the stone Aurora had sat upon, and he closed his hand around it, and it was a single cool definite thing in a country of yearning fog. And he remembered holding it, that he was a person, that he had a court, that he had a door to find, that the way to truly help the 10 million years of waiting was not to dissolve himself into comforting them, but to reach to someone behind the mouth, and mend the root from which all their waiting grew. The stone was Aurora's discipline, the slipping away done for others rather than the drowning in others, and he held it, and he did not dissolve, though the not dissolving was the hardest labor of his reign, harder than holding Diana's wound, harder than standing his ground before the apex of creation. He stood in the grey country with 10 million years of glad lonely waiting turned toward him, and he held a stone, and he said aloud to all of them at once, I know, I see you. I'm not going to leave you here, but I have to reach something first, and if I stop to gather every one of you now, I'll never reach it, and you'll wait forever, and I won't let that happen. So hold on a little longer. You've held on so long already. Hold on while I find the door. He walked then into the crowded grey, and the walking was its own education. The Eaten did not speak. Speech was a warmth they had lost in the stillness, but they were present, intact themselves, and Harry's vast attention could not help but read them as he passed, the way you cannot help but read the faces in a crowd. He passed a city that had been eaten so long ago that its architecture belonged to no aesthetic any living world remembered. Its towers built to a geometry that had gone out of the universe before the first of the layered skies condensed, and the people in it stood in their ancient streets in the grey stillness, mid-gesture, mid-word. A mother bent toward a child for 10 million years in a tenderness that had never been permitted to finish. He passed a war, both armies frozen in the grey, their hatred preserved as perfectly as the city's love, and he understood, looking at it, that the foundation did not curate the way Severano curated. It did not take the beautiful and spare the ugly, it took whatever it could reach, the loving and the warring alike, indiscriminate as loneliness always is, wanting only warmth and unable to tell one kind from another. And then he passed the quarter of Aurora's world. He knew it at once because it was the freshest grief in the whole grey country, the most recently stilled, its color not yet faded all the way to the ancient grey of the older Eaten. A province of fields and a city by a river, and the people who had walked for days to see a goddess end a drought, all of it here, all of it whole, all of it held in the stillness that the survivors above could not even mourn because the shape of it had been eaten from their memories. Harry stopped before it. He found among the stilled streets a woman bent over a garden she had been tending. In the instant the curl took her, her hands in the grey soil, her face turned up toward a sky that was no longer there, and he understood that she was someone Aurora had failed to save. One of the quarter, one of the revised, and that she was not destroyed, not gone, but here, waiting, recoverable, if the foundation could be persuaded to let her go home. You're not lost, he said to her, though she could not hear or could not answer if she did. I'm going to send you back. Your goddess grieved for you and couldn't even remember your name, and I'm going to give her back the chance to learn it. Hold on. You've held on this long, hold on a little more. And he straightened and walked on, deeper into the grey. And the resolve in him hardened from a brave thing said aloud for a frightened court into something colder and more certain, because he had now seen with his own attention rather than his omniscience, exactly what was waiting to be brought home, not an abstraction, not 10 million years of statistic, but a woman with her hands in a garden and a mother bent toward a child, and a city built to a geometry the universe had forgot, all of it real. All of it present, all of it his to save if he could reach the someone at the center and teach it, somehow, to open its hand. The lady could not follow him in. She had told him she could not, and she had not been exaggerating to spare herself. She had brought him to the threshold of the grey country, and there she had stopped, because to enter further would have meant abandoning the border entirely, and the border was the only thing holding the slackened wall between the living and the dead from giving way altogether. She stood at the edge of the twilight, half in and half out, her blue light the one bright thing at the rim of the grey, and she was the rope by which he meant to climb back out. And the narrator notes that she had never in the whole of forever been a rope for anyone, having always been the destination and never the way back. And that being the way back, being, for once, the thing that brings someone home rather than the thing that keeps them, was so foreign to her that she had to concentrate to do it. The way a left-handed person concentrates to write with the right. I can feel them turning toward you, she called, across the threshold, and her voice came strangely in the grey country, thinned as though the place resented sound. I can feel how much they want you to stay. Harry, the wall is already straining. I gave you a window. It is smaller than I hoped. Find the door. Whatever is behind the mouth, find it fast, because I can hold the border or I can hold it open for you. And I am discovering that I cannot do both for very long, and when I have to choose. She did not finish because they both knew what she would choose, and that the choosing would cost her either him or the wall, and that there was no version of the next while in which the lady at the end of things did not lose something she had spent forever protecting. I'll be fast, Harry said, and turned from her and walked deeper into the grey, toward the place his whole vast attention told him the mouth's other side must be the source, the root, the someone. And behind him the lady held her impossible position at the threshold, the border and the way back at once, and began for the first time in all her existence to be afraid in the particular way the living are afraid, which is the fear of losing a specific person rather than the abstract management of loss. Above the grey country, in the gallery of all things, the court held the door. The narrator must cut between the two fronts now because they were one battle fought in two places, and the meaning of each depended on the other. In the gallery, the slackened wall had consequences the court had not fully foreseen. With the lady no longer wholly the border, the dark itself, the mouth, the eating, the appetite that had turned toward the threshold, sensing the living warmth descend through it, pressed upward against the open door, trying to follow Harry down or to widen the gap he had gone through into something it could pour out of. And Severano, who had retreated wounded into his concordance, felt the wall slacken across all creation and understood, with the swift terrible intelligence that had kept him apex for 10 million years, that this was the moment that the king of all things had made himself vulnerable, had gone down into the one place from which no one returned, had left his door held by a handful of exhausted women and a slackened border, and that if Severano struck now with everything, he might yet slam the door. Trap the king below and restore the old bargain over the king's revised and forgotten body. He struck with everything. What the court endured at the door while their king walked among the eaten was the worst fighting any of them had ever known, and the narrator says this of a company that included an Amazon who had warred with gods, a goddess of death who had outlasted dynasties, and a magician who had stared down horrors that had no names in any tongue. It was the worst because it could not be won. There was no victory available at the door, only holding, only the refusal to break, against an enemy who had only to break them once. Severano came with the full undivided weight of his 10 million years, the apex of the old order, spending the entire hoard of himself in a single desperate cast, and behind his weight came the dark, pressing upward, and behind the dark came the strain of the slackened wall, and the court stood in the gap of the door with their backs to the threshold their king had gone through and held. Diana held the center. She had taken her stand directly before the door, her shield braced against the descending weight of the apex, and she did the thing she had been made for and had spent 3,000 years perfecting and had never until now been given a stage vast enough to deserve it. She refused to move. Severano broke against her the way the sea breaks against a headland, in fury and in foam and in the slow patient certainty that stone always loses to water given time. And Diana of the Masira was the stone that had decided by the loom of the fates not to lose. And the narrator records that her shield cracked and her arm broke, and she set the broken arm with a snarl and braced the cracked shield with her shoulder and did not move, because behind her was the door. And behind the door was the man she had sworn to guard, and an Amazon's oath is not a thing that bends when the bone does. Hela held the left, and she held it with her legions and her corpse fire and a viciousness that had finally, after all her covetous ages, found a worthy object, not a throne, not a slight, but a door behind which someone she had decided to keep was risking everything. And she fought beside the broken-armed Amazon with a coordination that the two of them would later refuse to admit, had become something like love, snarling insults at each other across the press that were. In the private grammar they had developed, the tenderest things either had ever said. Zatanna held the impossible part. The dark, pressing upward through the slackened door, could not be fought with force. She of all of them understood this, she who said the words, and so she did not fight it. She sang to it. She had realized in the desperate arithmetic of the battle that the dark pressing upward was not Severano's weapon, but a thing reaching for the warmth that had gone down through it, that it too in its mindless mouthway was turning toward Harry the way the Eaten had turned. And so the mistress of the mystic arts planted herself in the gap of the door and spoke to the appetite of the universe the only language that had ever calmed a frightened thing, which was attention. She said the words forward and backward. A working that did not push the dark away but acknowledged it, that said in effect, I see you. I know you are reaching, wait, he is coming back and he will not forget you. And the dark, astonished, having spent 10 million years being fed and steered and fought but never once being spoken to, slowed its upward press to listen, and bought the court the only thing that mattered, which was time. And Oraro, who had lost a quarter of her world and come anyway, who carried her grief at its level now and had folded it into something harder than grief, which is purpose, Oraro held the sky. She could not maintain the wall, that was the lady's burden. But she could maintain the gallery, the way she maintained her world, by main force and craft, calling the structure of the house of all things to hold its shape against the strain the way she called clouds to hold their rain, and where Severano's weight cracked the knot ground and the dark's pressure thinned the frames. Oraro Munro stood with her arms open and her storm-cloud hair streaming in a wind from no direction, and held the architecture of creation together by the same tired, generous discipline with which she had ended 1,000 droughts, the slipping away done now not for one world but for all of them at once. They held. The narrator wishes the audience to sit with the smallness of that verb against the largeness of what it cost. They did not win. There was no winning. They held and bled and held, 4 women and a silent diminished maker propped among them, clutching the memory of a door, while below them in the gray country their king walked toward the source of everything, and the only question left in all of creation was whether he would reach it before the holding broke. There came a moment in the holding when it nearly broke, and the narrator records it because courage is not the absence of the moment but what is done inside it. Diana fell. The apex of creation, spending itself against her headland, found at last the rhythm of her bracing and broke it. A single overwhelming descent of weight timed to the instant her broken arm faltered, and the Amazon who had sworn not to move was driven to one knee, her cracked shield buckling, the door behind her undefended for the breadth of a held breath. And in that breadth, Severano's weight poured toward the gap, toward the threshold, toward the way down to the king he meant to bury, and the holding, which had been a wall, became for one instant a thing with a hole in it. It was Circe who filled the hole, and Circe could not speak and could not transform and had spent herself to silence, and so the narrator must explain what she did, because she did it without a word and it would otherwise go unrecorded. She had been propped among them through the whole battle, the diminished maker, clutching the memory of a door, and when Diana fell and the gap opened, Circe the silent, with the last unfluent remnant of what she had been, lifted the small beautiful thing she had been holding, the open door she had made at the end of herself, and she pressed it into the gap. Not as a weapon, as an arrangement. The last arrangement of the greatest maker who had ever lived. A door placed in a breach, that said to the weight pouring through it the only thing Circe had left to say, which was, "This is a way through, not a way to crush." A threshold, not a wound, and Severano's descending weight, which had been force, met the idea of a door and was, for the breadth of that held breath, persuaded to be passage instead of pressure, and it flowed through the gap harmlessly, a flood rooted through a sluice, and bought Diana the instant she needed to set her broken arm a second time and rise. She rose. The narrator wishes it known that she rose laughing, not from joy but from the wild grim hilarity of a warrior who has been knocked down and discovered she is not done. The laugh that frightens enemies worse than any war cry because it means the thing in front of them has stopped being afraid of dying. And she set her shoulder to the buckled shield and braced the headland of herself across the door again, and beside her Hela snarled something filthy and tender. And Zatanna picked her song back up from the bar she'd lost, and Aurora held the sky, and the silent maker sagged back among them, spent again, having given a thing she did not have to give and given it anyway, and the wall was whole once more, by the breadth of a held breath and the last gift of a woman who could no longer speak. "Whatever you are doing down there," Diana gritted to the door at her back, to the king she could not see, "do it. We are magnificent and we are losing. Even magnificence has a floor, Harry, and we are standing on it. Reach the someone, reach it now." Harry found the door at the center of the gray country, and the door was not a door. He had expected a door because Circe had made him one with her last fluent gesture, and because the language of the whole endeavor had been the language of knocking, and the mind builds its expectations out of the words it has been given. What he found instead, at the place where the gray twilight gathered to its deepest stillness, was a figure. It sat. That was the thing that undid him, after all the cosmic grandeur of the descent, that the source of the hunger that had eaten 10 million years of worlds was a figure, seated alone in the deepest gray, with its back to the whole crowded country of the things it had taken, facing away into a grayer gray beyond, as though it could not bear to look at what it had done and could not stop doing it. It was not large. It could have been any size. The gray country did not enforce scale, but it had chosen or fallen into the size of a person, a single seated person with its shoulders curved inward and its head bowed, and it was old in a way that made Severano's 10 million years look like an afternoon, old in a way that made the lady's tenure of forever look recent, old the way the foundation of a house is older than the house, older than the idea of the house. Present before the first stone was laid, and forgotten the moment the walls went up. Harry understood what it was before it spoke, because understanding was among the very many things he could do now, and because the shape of it, once seen, explained everything. This was the thing that had been here first, before the first world, before the first light. Before the lady began her tenure of endings, before Severano found his terrible bargain, before any of the layered skies condensed out of the between space, there had been this, a someone, alone in the gray, the foundation upon which creation would eventually be built. And creation had been built upon it, world over world over world, the whole bright crowded glory of everything. And not one of all the uncountable lives that had ever lived atop the foundation had ever once turned around and acknowledged the thing they were standing on. They had been born and loved and grieved and died and been collected by the lady, and warred over by Severano, and they had built their entire reality on the back of someone who had been there before them all, and they had never said hello. Not once in all the ages. The foundation had held up the whole of creation and been thanked by none of it, met by none of it, seen by none of it, and the not being seen had become, across spans that broke the meaning of the word, an ache, and the ache had become a reaching, and the reaching, the only way the foundation knew to touch the worlds that stood upon it and ignored it, had become the eating. It did not eat to destroy, it ate to feel. It pulled the worlds down into the gray, because pulling them down was the only way anything had ever come close enough for it to know it was not alone. And each world it took it kept here in the crowded gray, gathered around itself, and still it sat with its back to them, facing the greater gray, because it had never learned that the things it pulled down were company. It only knew they had been warm once before they went still in its keeping. Serrano had called it a hunger and fed it. The lady had called it the one country she did not rule and stayed away. Diana had called it a riddle wearing a war's clothing. Oraro had said the answer would be care, not power. And Hela had said the murder of death, an abomination, theft. They had all been right, and they had all been looking at the mouth. And none of them had seen the thing the mouth belonged to, which was not a monster and not an appetite and not an abomination, but the oldest, loneliest, most thoroughly unacknowledged person in all of creation, sitting with its back turned, eating the only company it had ever been able to reach, and not understanding, after all the ages, why the company always went so quiet and so cold. Harry walked around in front of it. He had to walk a long way, because the figure had set its back to the whole of everything, and coming around to face it meant crossing the entire crowded grief of the gray country, 10 million years of the eaten parting before him as he passed, all of them turning to watch the warm living thing approach the one among them that even they, the taken, had never dared approach. And he came around in front of the seated figure, and he crouched, the way he had crouched before a dying Tom Riddle in a broken chapel on the first day of his reign, so that his eyes would be level with the bowed head of the foundation of all things. And he did the thing that no one in the whole history of creation had ever done. He said hello. The figure went still, a different stillness than the stillness it had worn, the stillness of a thing that has heard a sound it has no category for. Slowly, with a reluctance that had ages in it, with the awful tentative caution of something that has been disappointed so many times it has forgotten the shape of hope, the bowed head lifted, and the foundation of all things looked, for the first time in the whole of its unbearable existence, at someone who was looking back. It had no face exactly, or it had every face, the gray country declining as ever to enforce a shape. But there was an attention in it now, turned outward, turned toward Harry, and when it spoke, it did not speak in the language of mouths. It spoke the way the dark had always spoken, by easing or by widening, by the grammar of presence and absence, but it had never before had anything to say that was not hunger, and now it did, and the saying of it shook the gray country to its roots. You see me. The words were not words, they were the easing itself, the slackening of a clench held since before time, translated by Harry's vast attention into something the narrator can set on a page. You turned around, they never turn around. I hold them up, all of them, the whole bright weight. I have held them up since before holding had a name, and they are born, and they live, and they die upon me, and they never, never turn around. I reached for them. It was the only way to feel them, to pull them down where they would be close. But they go cold when I hold them, they go quiet. I do not understand why the warm things go quiet when I finally have them close enough to know. And the easing trembled, and across the crowded gray 10 million years of the eaten leaned in. Because they were hearing, all of them, the thing that had taken them explain itself for the first time, and they were discovering that the thing that had taken them was not cruel, but only catastrophically lonely. You turned around. Why did you turn around? Because someone told me the answer would be care, not power, Harry said. He stayed crouched level with it, his hands open, the way Diana had taught him, neither pressing nor reaching. Because someone else told me you were a riddle wearing a war's clothing, and I finally understand what the riddle was. Everyone who ever came to you came to fight you or feed you or steer you, and you'd never once been met. Hello, I'm Harry, I'm sorry. I'm sorry no one ever turned around. I'm sorry creation stood on you for the whole of forever and never said thank you. I'm sorry you had to eat us to feel us, and I'm sorry no one ever told you that the reason we went cold and quiet in your keeping is that you were pulling us out of the only place we could stay warm, which is up there, in the light, alive, not because we didn't want to be near you, but because being pulled down is the one thing that stops us being the warmth you were reaching for in the first place. He drew a breath in the gray, with the whole of creation balanced on the next words and the court bleeding at the door above him. You don't have to be alone anymore. That's the thing I came to tell you. You don't have to eat us to feel us. There's another way. I can show you. But I need you to do something first, something you've never done, and it's going to be the hardest thing you've ever done, harder than holding up all of creation, and I wouldn't ask if there were any other road. What? The easing was desperate now, the desperation of a thing offered after eternity, the one thing it had never dared want. What? I will do it. What? Let them go, Harry said gently. All of them, everything you've ever pulled down here to keep close. 10 million years of it. Let it go home up into the light where it can be warm again. I know it's the opposite of everything your loneliness is screaming at you to do. I know letting them go feels like going back to being alone. But it isn't, and here's why. And this is the part you have to trust me on, because you've never had anyone to trust. If you let them go warm, they'll know you. They'll remember that the foundation turned out to be a someone, and that the someone let them go home when it could have kept them, and they'll tell each other up there in the light. And for the first time in all of forever, creation will know you're down here, and it will turn around. Not because you pulled it down, because you let it go. That's the only way anyone's love was ever worth having, friend. It has to be able to leave. Diana taught me that with a spear on the first day. Let them leave and watch what comes back. For a moment, one long impossible moment that the narrator will stretch out here because the foundation itself stretched it, holding the instant the way you hold a sip of water after a long thirst. The offer hung in the gray, and the oldest thing in creation considered it, and across the crowded country the Eaton stirred. They had heard. All of them, the whole 10 million years of taken things, had heard the warm living thing tell the foundation that there was another way, that it could let them go home, that letting go was how love was made worth having. And a thing happened among the Eaton that had not happened in the gray country since the first world was pulled down into it. Hope moved through them. The mother bent toward her child for 10 million years, felt the gesture loosen by a degree, the held tenderness at last near to being permitted to finish. The frozen war felt its hatred thin, the soldiers' frozen faces turning, almost, toward the light they half remembered. The woman with her hands in the garden lifted her gray face a fraction higher toward the sky that was not there but might, the rumor went, be there again. They could not speak. But they leaned all of them toward the small distant figure of the warm thing crouched before the foundation, and they lent it the only thing they had left to lend, which was their wanting, 10 million years of wanting to go home, gathered and offered up behind Harry like a wind at a sail. And the foundation felt the wanting of the things it had kept, and for the first time it understood that wanting as a separate thing from its own, understood that the warmth it had pulled down had been wanting, all along, all those ages, to be elsewhere, that the going cold and quiet it had never understood was the warmth grieving for the up there it had been taken from. The realization moved through the foundation like the first crack of thaw through a frozen river, and Harry, crouched before it with his open hands, felt the ancient clench begin, by a hairline, to ease, felt the foundation reach, tentatively, toward the unbearable possibility that it could be known and not be alone and not have to hold anyone here to feel them. Far above, the wall of creation groaned at the easing, because an easing in the foundation was a shift in the deepest stone of everything, and a shift in the deepest stone runs upward through every story of the house. The lady at the threshold cried out, not in pain, but in the strain of holding the border steady across a tremor that ran from the bottom of the world to the top. The court at the door felt the knot ground heave beneath them. And Harry understood in that stretched moment that he was standing at the exact balance point of all things, that the foundation was poised between the clench it had worn for eternity and the opening he had offered it, and that it could fall either way, and that the next breath would decide whether 10 million years of the Eat went home into the light or whether the oldest loneliness in creation, terrified of its own first hope, pulled everything down into the gray to keep from being alone. That's it, Harry murmured, to the easing, to the reaching, to the hairline thaw. That's it. You feel them wanting to go home. That's not them rejecting you. That's them being alive. Let them be alive. Let them go. I've got you. I'm not going anywhere. Let them go and keep me. If you have to keep someone, keep the one who chose to come down, not the ones you had to drag. He opened his hands wider, an invitation, a held door of his own. Open your hand, friend. I'll hold mine open with you. On three, we'll do it together. And that was the moment the foundation of all things panicked. The narrator has watched a great many beings receive a great many gifts, and reports that the most dangerous moment in any rescue is not the danger but the instant the drowning thing is offered the rope. Because a creature that has given up hope does not reach for the rope, it thrashes, it clutches. It tries to climb the very arm extended to it and drags the rescuer under, not from malice but from a terror so old it has fused with the bone. The foundation had held its loneliness for longer than time, had made of it a self, had eaten worlds to survive it. And when Harry offered to end it, the part of it that had survived by clutching could not tell the difference between let them go and lose everything, and it reacted to the offer of love the way it had reacted to everything for 10 million years. It reached. It reached for Harry, the warm living thing, the one that had turned around, the one it could not, would not, dared not lose now that it had finally been seen. And it reached not gently but with the whole of its ancient starving strength to pull him down, to keep him close, to hold the one warmth that had ever known it here in the gray forever where it could never go cold or quiet or leave. The gray country convulsed. The crowded Eaton scattered like startled birds. And the mouth far above, at the door the court was holding, the mouth gaped wide, because its other end had just clutched at something it would tear the wall of creation apart to keep, and the upward pressure that Zatanna had sung into stillness redoubled in an instant into a thing no song could calm. "Harry," the lady's voice from the threshold thinned and frantic. "It's pulling the wall. I can't. It's coming through, all of it. Everything I've kept out for forever is coming through the door. It's tearing open. I have to choose. I have to become the border now or lose the wall. And if I become the border, I close your way home. Do you hear me? If I save the wall, I trap you down there." And the narrator records that the lady at the end of things, who had spent the whole of forever making the impossible choices of mortality with perfect serenity, was at that moment not serene at all, was a being splitting down the middle between the duty that was her whole existence and the one person who had ever been glad to see her, and that there is no grief in any of the layered skies quite like the grief of death, discovering that she, too, can be made to choose between everything and someone. And below in the convulsing gray, with the foundation's ancient terror dragging at him in the eaten scattering and the wall of creation tearing open above, Harry heard the other voice, the one Diana had warned him of, the one she could not follow him down to silence. It came threading through the chaos, patient, exhausted, 10 million years old, and it was Sevrano, reaching into the country below through the door his enemy had opened. And it said almost kindly, almost sadly, "I told you. I told you it was not a someone you could save. It is the appetite at the bottom of everything, and you have woken it. And now it will pull you under and tear the wall and eat creation in an afternoon, exactly as I said, and the last thing you will know is that I was the only one who ever loved the world enough to keep it asleep. Kneel, even now I will help you put it back to sleep. Feed it yourself and steer it as I did, and we will close the wall together and creation will go on, smaller, safer, embalmed. It is not too late to be wise. It is only too late to be kind." Harry knelt in the gray country, not to Sevrano, never to Sevrano, but down lower, all the way down, into the convulsing reach of the foundation that was tearing at him in its terror. And he did not pull away from the clutching, and he did not fight it, because fighting it was force, and force had never once been the answer. And he did the last and hardest thing, the thing that was either going to save creation or end it. The thing only the boy from the cupboard who had become the king of everything could possibly have thought to do at the bottom of the world with the wall tearing open above him. He stopped holding the stone. He opened his hand, and he let the one thing anchoring him to himself fall into the gray, and he let the foundation pull him close, all the way close as it had wanted anything in 10 million years, and he wrapped his arms around the oldest, loneliest thing in all of creation, and he held it the way no one had ever held it, and he said into the terror, into the clutching, into the tearing of the wall and the whisper of the apex and the scattering of the eaten and the splitting grief of death at the threshold, "I'm not going to leave. You don't have to tear anything to keep me. I'm already here. I'm already staying. Now let the others go home and stay here with me while you do it and find out that you were never going to be alone again the second you let me close." The wall screamed. The lady made her choice, and the gray country went white. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7 The turning around the white was not an ending. The narrator wishes to establish this at once because a lesser story would have made the white an ending, a blast, an annihilation, the clean catastrophic light in which all accounts are settled, and the white that filled the gray country when the lady made her choice and the foundation panicked was none of those things. It was the white of a held breath finally released. It was the white that comes not when a thing is destroyed, but when a thing that has been clenched for an unbearable length of time, at last, against everything its terror is screaming, "Let's go." For the lady at the end of things had made her choice, and her choice was the third thing, the thing neither of the options she had named aloud, because she was older and stranger than her own despair and had remembered in the splitting instant that she was not only the border and not only the way back but the thing that stood between, and that a thing which stands between can, if it is willing to be torn, be a bridge. She did not become the border and trap him. She did not hold the door open and lose the wall. She made herself the seam, she let the wall tear and tore with it, and held the two halves of the wound together with the substance of her own being, becoming for one impossible interval not the line between the living and the dead but the stitch through it, the place where the torn thing was sewn by the only entity old enough to bear the sewing. It cost her. The narrator will come to the cost. But it meant that when the foundation, held in Harry's arms, terrified, reaching to drag him down forever, heard him say, "I'm already staying, now let the others go home," there was a seam for the others to go home through, a lady-shaped stitch in the wall, a door held open not against the dark but woven into it. And the foundation opened its hand. It did it the way the genuinely terrified do the bravest things, not in a grand, cathartic release but in a small, shaking, partial unclenching. A single finger of its ancient grip easing, then another, while every instinct it had built across eternity shrieked at it to clutch harder. It opened its hand because a warm thing was holding it and had promised to stay, and because the promise, against 10 million years of evidence, it had decided wildly, desperately, with the whole of its first and only hope to believe. And as the hand opened, the white poured out of the gray country, and the white was the Eaten going home. They went home all at once, and they went home gently, which should not both have been possible and was, because the foundation was not flinging them away but releasing them, and there is a universe of difference between the two, the difference between a thing thrown and a thing freed. 10 million years of the taken rose up through the lady-shaped seam in the wall, up out of the gray twilight, up into the light they had grieved for in their stillness. The mother's tenderness toward her child permitted at last to finish, the city of forgotten geometry rebuilding itself in a sky that remembered it, the frozen war thawing into two armies of bewildered soldiers blinking up at a sun, the woman with her hands in the garden feeling soil that was warm again beneath fingers that could move. They went home. All of them, and the gray country, which had been crowded with the unacknowledged warmth of the whole history of creation's grief, emptied and grew quiet. And for the first time since before time, the foundation of all things sat in its twilight, not surrounded by the cold company it had dragged down to feel, but alone, truly alone, for one terrible breath. And then not alone, because Harry was still there, holding it exactly as he had promised, the one warmth that had not gone home, the one that had chosen to stay. There, Harry said into the quiet, still holding it, "That's the worst of it done. That's the bravest thing anyone in all of creation has ever done, and you did it, and the sky didn't fall, and I'm still here. Feel that? They're home, and you're not empty. You let them go, and you're not empty, because letting them go is the thing that finally lets someone want to come back to you on purpose. You've never had that. You've only ever had the ones you dragged. Now you get to find out what it's like when they come freely. Starting with me, I came freely, I'm not dragged. I chose the bottom of the world and the oldest loneliness in it, and I'd choose it again." The foundation did not have a face, but the gray country, emptied and quiet, took on by degrees a different quality of light, not white now. The white had spent itself in the homecoming, but a soft dawn gray going slowly, tentatively, toward an actual dawn, the first dawn that twilight had ever permitted itself, because dawn implies a morning and morning implies a tomorrow, and the foundation, for the whole of its existence, had never believed in tomorrows. Having only the eternal clenched now of its loneliness, it believed in one now, it was learning the others. "What is your name?" it asked Harry in the grammar of easing, and then before he could answer it asked the question that mattered more, the question that was the whole of its first morning. "What is mine? I have never had one. No one ever turned around long enough to give me one. Severano called me the dark, the others called me the hunger, the eater, the end of endings. Those are not names, those are what frightened things call the shape of their fear. You turned around, you said hello, you stayed." "So I think," the easing trembled, hoping, "I think it should be you who gives me the name, if you are willing, if a thing like me is permitted to be named." And Harry, at the bottom of the world, holding the foundation of all things in the first dawn of its existence, gave it a name, and the narrator will not transcribe the name, for the same reason the narrator did not transcribe Diana's wound, because it was given in a moment too private and too sacred for the idle traffic of an audience, and because a name given in love is the property of the one who receives it and no one else. It is enough to say that it was a small name, a gentle name, an ordinary name of the kind given to children and friends and beloved things, the opposite in every way of the vast terrible titles the fright had hung upon it, and that the foundation received its name the way parched ground receives rain, the way the lonely receive a friend at a door, the way the whole of creation might have received the foundation across all the ages had any of it only thought to turn around, and that with the name. The last of the hunger went out of the oldest thing in everything, because hunger is what loneliness becomes when it has no name to be called by, and a thing that has been named and met and stayed with is not hungry anymore. It is only at last home. The eating was over, not defeated, the narrator insists on the word because defeat was never the shape of it. Ended the way a misunderstanding ends, the way a grief ends when it is finally witnessed, the way a riddle ends when someone at last gives the answer that was always care and never power. Diana had been right on the first day. It had been a riddle wearing a war's clothing, and the answer had been a word, and the word had been hello, and the second word had been a name, and there had never been a blow that could have done what those two small words did, because you cannot strike a thing into feeling seen, you can only see it, which is harder and slower, and the only thing that has ever actually worked. Severano felt the eating end, and the narrator must report what it did to him, because the apex of the old order had staked his entire 10-million-year self on the proposition that it could not be done. He had been wrong. That was the unsurvivable thing. Not defeated, Harry never struck him, never unmade him, never so much as raised a hand against the concordance of the eighth sphere. Severano was simply, comprehensively wrong, and had been wrong for 10 million years, and had fed worlds to a hunger that was never a hunger but a loneliness, had committed the largest and longest atrocity in the history of creation, and had committed it for nothing, because the thing he had been appeasing could have been ended at any point in all those ages by anyone willing to turn around and say hello, and he had never turned around. Because turning around would have meant admitting that the arithmetic he had built his soul on was not the hard wisdom of the only one who loved creation enough to damn himself, but the cowardice of a being too frightened of a stranger to introduce himself. When Harry came back up, and he did come back up, the narrator will reach that Severano was waiting in the gallery, having abandoned his beautiful prison and come at the last to the house of all things, because there was nowhere else left for a man whose entire justification had just been disproven to go. He had put down the chosen exhaustion. He stood as what he was, old beyond bearing and hollow, and holding the truth no one had pressed on him, which had grown in the hours since Harry left it with him, into the only weight in all creation he could not steer or feed or set down. "You could have ended it," Severano said. His voice had lost the everywhereness of the apex. It was just a voice now, a tired old voice in a vast room. At any time, hello, a name, that is all it ever needed. And I fed it worlds. I fed it 10 million years of worlds to keep it asleep, to keep my concordance safe, and the whole time the answer was hello, and I never, he stopped. The hollow of him had no bottom. "Strike me, I am begging you. Do the thing you would not do in my hall. Unmake me. I have earned every unmaking in your arsenal, and I find that I cannot bear to stand inside a creation that knows what I did and let me keep standing. Mercy would be the cruelest thing you could do to me now, and you are cruel with mercy. I have seen it. You did it to my herald, and you did it to me in my own hall. So be cruel one more time in the way I am asking, and end me, because I cannot end myself and I cannot live." And Harry, newly returned from the bottom of the world, his court bleeding around him, the foundation named and quiet at the root of everything, looked at the apex of the old order, the worst criminal in the history of creation, begging for the oblivion that would spare him from his own truth, and the narrator records that the king of all things was, for a moment, tempted, not to cruelty, to kindness of exactly the kind Severano named, the clean release, the unmaking that would end the unbearable weight. It would have been merciful. It would also have been the last and largest version of the trap the lady had warned him of on the first day, the granting of a thing because the granting was easier than the holding. "No," Harry said, "I'm not going to unmake you. Not because you don't deserve it. I'm not going to insult you by pretending the question of what you deserve is simple, because it isn't, and a man who fed 10 million years of worlds to a loneliness doesn't get a clean answer to what he deserves. I'm not going to unmake you because unmaking you would let you stop. And you don't get to stop." He came to stand before Severano, and his voice was gentle, and the gentleness was the most terrible thing in the room. "The Eaten are coming home. Every world you spent, every life you chose to feed it. They're rising back into the light right now, 10 million years of them, and not one of them knows your name or what you did, because the dark ate the shape of them out of memory, including the memory of who chose them. They'll never know to blame you. You're going to live in a creation full of people you murdered who don't remember being murdered, and you're going to be the only one who remembers, and you're going to spend however long you last carrying the whole weight of it alone, with no one to share it and no one to forgive you, because no one knows there's anything to forgive. That's not a punishment I'm giving you, Severano. It's just the truth you built, finally arriving. I'm only refusing to let you escape it." He paused. "But I'll tell you the one thing that might eventually make it bearable, because I'm not cruel enough to leave you with only the weights. Go find the foundation. Go to the bottom of the world, where you never went in 10 million years, and turn around and say hello and tell it what you did. It's the only thing in all creation that might understand you, because it spent the same ages just as alone and just as misunderstood, and it, unlike the worlds you spent, will remember. Confess to the one you wronged most. It won't absolve you, but it might in time be a friend to you, and a friend who knows the worst of you is the only forgiveness that was ever real. That's the sentence. Carry the weight and carry it toward the one being who can actually share it. Now go." And Severano went down at last, after 10 million years, to the bottom of the world he had been too frightened to face. And whether the foundation became his friend or his judge or merely his fellow in the long work of being known, the narrator does not say, because that is a story for an age past the end of this one, and some sentences are meant to be served in private. The climb back up was the lady's gift and the lady's cost, and the narrator turns to it now with the care it deserves. When the foundation opened its hand and the Eaten poured home through the seam she had made of herself, Harry came home with them, the last warmth out, having stayed to the very end, having given his anchoring stone to the gray and his promise to the loneliness and his name to the thing at the root of everything, and he rose through the lady-shaped stitch in the wall, and as he rose he understood what she had spent. To be the seam, she had unmade her own border, torn herself along the line she had been, and a thing that tears itself to hold two halves of a wound together does not simply snap back whole when the wound is healed. She had poured the substance of her being into the stitch. She had been spending herself the entire time he was below, thread drawn from a spool that was her own self. And when the last of the eaten came home and the wall began, finally, to heal, there was very little of the lady left to heal back into. He found her at the threshold where she had stood the whole time, and she was faint, faint the way the dawn is faint, the way a candle is faint at the bottom of its wax, and the soft blue light of her had thinned almost to nothing. And she looked at him as he came up out of the gray with an expression he had not seen on her before, which was uncertainty, the uncertainty of a being who does not know whether she has enough of herself left to continue being. "You came back," she said. Her voice was a thread. "I wasn't sure. I made the seam and I held it, and I didn't know if I'd have enough left to. I spent more than I meant to. I always do, around you. It's the most reckless I've ever been, and I've been the most careful thing in creation since before creation." A flicker of the old fondness, very faint. "Worth it. I want that on the record. Whatever's left of me, it was worth it. I was glad to be the door home. I've spent forever being the door away. I didn't know how much I wanted to be the other kind until I was tearing myself into it." And Harry did the thing he had refused to do to anyone else in the whole of his reign. The thing he had withheld from Diana under her proving, from Hela in her wounded pride, from Severano in his hollow begging, because the rule had always been that he would not reach in and remake a soul against the slow, honest grain of its choosing. And the rule had been right, and he had kept it at real cost through everything. But the lady was not unwilling. The lady had spent herself freely, gladly, by her own choosing, into the saving of all things. And what Harry did now was not a remaking against her grain but a replenishing along it. He gave her back what she had spent, poured it from the ocean of himself into the guttering candle of her, not changing one line of who she was but simply restoring the substance her gladness had burned, the way you feed a fire that has spent itself warming you. The way the foundation had learned to let warmth come freely, rather than dragging it down. And the lady at the end of things drank the replenishing and grew, by degrees, less faint, not remade, not owned, not a soul reached into and rearranged, but a self restored to its own full measure by someone who had earned, through a whole reign of refusing, the right to give exactly this one gift to exactly this one person who had given everything first. "You're allowed," she murmured as the blue light of her steadied. "I know what you're thinking, that this is the trap, the reaching in, the thing I warned you against. It isn't. The trap is reaching into someone who didn't choose. I chose. I tore myself on purpose. You're not remaking me, Harry. You're just refusing to let my gladness cost me my whole self. There's a difference. You of all beings know there's a difference. You spent the whole of forever learning it." The light steadied further, and with it her voice, and with her voice the old low, fond, unhurried music of her. "Welcome home, king of all things. You did the impossible thing. You met the unmeetable and named the unnameable, and you came home to me." She paused, and the next words were the shortest she had ever spoken and the largest. "I'm glad to see you." It was, the narrator notes, the exact thing she had told him she wanted, across all of forever, to be met once by someone glad, and she had spent the chapter being glad to see him instead, which is the secret that the gladness, once it is real, prefers to flow outward, and that the surest sign you have been truly met is that you find yourself glad to meet in return. He brought the lady up into the gallery with him, restored and steadier, and the court that had held the door turned as one to see their king come home, and the narrator wishes to record the reunion, because the chronicles of great victories tend to leap straight from the climax to the coronation, and skip the part that the people who fought actually remember, which is not the triumph but the moment afterward when they counted each other, and found, against the odds, that they were all still there. They were a wreck, the lot of them. Diana stood swaying on her feet with her arm broken and her shield in pieces, and a grin on her face that had blood at the corner of it. Hela's antlered crown had cracked clean across one tine, and her cloak of woven shadow hung in tatters, and she wore the ruin like the finest gown she had ever owned. Zatanna's flourishing hands were burned to the wrist from saying the words at a scale that should have killed her, and she was flexing them and wincing and refusing to stop flexing them. Because a magician's hands are her whole self, and she needed to know they still answered. Aurora had spent so much of herself holding the architecture of the house together that her storm cloud hair had gone briefly, startlingly white at the temples. A goddess who had aged a decade in an hour and would carry the streak forever after as the truest crown she owned. And Circe sat silent and diminished among them, propped in gray, clutching nothing now, the memory of her door already given and spent. "You're all alive," Harry said. It came out rougher than the serene register of his whole reign, because the cupboard boy was very near the surface, having just held the loneliest thing in creation at the bottom of the world and barely climbed back out. "You held the door. I felt it shaking the whole time, and it never broke. You held it." "It broke," Diana said. "Once. Circe mended it with the last thing she had." She looked at the silent maker, and there was a grief in the Amazon's face she did not bother to hide, because she had buried enough illusions to know that hiding grief is how you let it rot. She is not gone, but she is not herself. Whatever Severano did to her is undone the moment the foundation lets go of what it's holding, Harry said. She's not lost, Diana. None of them are, not Circe, not your quarter of a world, Aurora, not any of the 10 million years. They're coming home, I promise you. Watch, and then, because the promise was true but had not yet arrived, and because there was an interval to fill while creation reorganized itself, and because the people he loved were standing battered and alive in front of him and he had spent the last while certain he would never see them again, Harry did the unkingly thing, the human thing, and crossed the gallery and put his arms around them, one by one, and let himself be held by people who could have left and had instead stayed at a door and held it until it shook. Hela permitted the embrace for exactly as long as her dignity allowed, and 1 second longer, which from Hela was a sonnet. If you tell anyone I allowed this, she murmured against his shoulder, I will summon a legion and deny it to their faces, and they will believe me, because I am very frightening and you are very sentimental, and the smart money is always on the frightening. But she did not let go first. The narrator marks it. She did not let go first. Diana embraced him like a soldier embracing a soldier who has come back from a sortie everyone counted lost, hard and brief and ferocious, and then held him at arm's length with her one good hand, and looked him over for damage with the proprietary fierceness of a woman who had appointed herself his guard, and took the appointment seriously. You gave up your anchor, she said. It was not a question, she had felt it somehow across the door. The stone Circe made you, you let it go down there, you unanchored yourself on purpose in the one place a living mind could be lost forever. I did, Harry admitted. That was reckless and foolish, and exactly the kind of thing I swore to put a spear in you for, Diana said, and her voice was not steady. And it was also the only thing that could have worked, because the Foundation needed to see that you would let go of yourself to hold it, and a man clutching his anchor cannot also open his arms. So I will not put a spear in you, this time. But understand, Harry, that I felt you let it go, and for the length of a held breath I believed I had lost the man I crossed the sea to weigh, and I have decided that I do not care to feel that again, and that this caring is your fault, and that I hold you entirely responsible for having made the unmovable Amazon into a woman who can be afraid for someone. She let go of him and squared her shoulders, and the warrior reassembled herself over the woman. We will discuss it at length. After you have rested, consider it the first true test of the long proving. Aurora came to him last among them, the goddess with the new white temples, and she did not embrace him at first. She simply looked at him, the way she had looked at him on a wet stone in a borrowed dusk, the look of one tired professional recognizing another. You did the thing only care could do, she said. I told you it was possible so that you would remember a tired woman had said so. Did you remember? At the bottom of the world, Harry said, with everything pulling at me, your voice was one of the ones that held. You and Diana and Hela, the three of you talked me down a riddle I'd have died inside without you. You told me it was care, not power. You were right. You're always right about the weather, Aurora, and it turns out the whole of creation is weather, if you know how to read it. And the storm goddess who had spent her life being knelt to by people who saw the weather, and never the woman stepped into the arms of a man who had only ever seen the woman, and let herself, for a moment, be the one who was held up instead of the one holding. And the rain that was always near her fell soft and warm through the gallery, though there was no sky there to fall from, and no one remarked on it, and Zatanna quietly turned each drop as it fell into a small drifting light. Because a magician cannot watch a beautiful thing happen and leave it unembellished, and because the court had won, and the winning deserved to be made lovely. Circe came back with the rest of the Eton in a manner of speaking, because what Severano had done to her was the dark's own work, a thinning, a revision toward absence, and when the Foundation opened its hand and released everything it had pulled toward the gray, it released, too, the brilliance it had been bleeding out of the maker through the wound Severano dealt. The saturation came back into her between one breath and the next. The narrator was watching, and reports that the first thing Circe did upon recovering the fluent endless chatter of her nature was to look around the battered gallery at the broken-armed Amazon and the burned magician and the storm goddess holding up the sky and the goddess of death who had fought the whole battle at the Amazon's back, and to say with the full restored splendor of her ancient voice, you all look perfectly dreadful, and the architecture in here has been through something traumatic. And I have been silent for what felt like an age, so kindly stand still and let me make everything beautiful before I lose my temper. And she did. She walked through the wrecked house of all things and reminded it of what it could be. And the cracks closed and the frames brightened and the knot ground smoothed, and she reminded Diana's broken arm of what it could be, and the bone knit, and she did this for each of them in turn. The maker restored, weeping a little as she worked and pretending with great dignity that she was not, because she had been to the edge of her own absence and come back. And the coming back had taught even the oldest of them that beauty is not a luxury, but the thing you make to prove to yourself that you survived. And then the worlds came home. The narrator has saved this for last among the homecomings because it was the largest, and because it was the moment the whole of creation, for the first time in its existence, turned around. Up through the healed seam, out from the emptied gray, the eaten worlds of 10 million years rose back into the layered skies, and as they rose, restored, their billions of revised lives blinking back into being, something passed through the entire body of creation that had never passed through it before, a single shared knowledge arriving in every world at once. That there was a foundation, that it had a name, that it had held them all up across the whole of forever and been alone, and that a king had gone down to the bottom of everything and turned around and said hello. The worlds learned, all at once, the thing none of their ages had ever known. And the worlds did the thing the foundation had waited the whole of eternity for. They turned around. It looked from the gallery like creation kneeling. The narrator chooses the words with care because the propagandists of later ages would seize on this moment and render it 100 self-serving ways, the multiverse bowing to its Omni-King, the cosmos prostrate before its sovereign, every world on its knees to the man who ruled them. And it is true that across the layered skies the worlds turned and bent and bowed, an inconceivable genuflection rolling outward through all of reality. But they were not kneeling to Harry. They were kneeling to the foundation, turning around at last, to acknowledge the thing they had stood upon and ignored since before time, paying the debt of attention that 10 million years had owed and never paid. And Harry, watching the whole of creation bend toward the bottom of the world, understood that this was the only coronation he would ever want, the cosmos kneeling not to him but past him, through him, to the lonely named thing he had befriended. And he found that being the man who turned creation's face toward the one it had forgotten was a far greater thing than being the man it knelt to, and he was content. But the court did kneel to him, and that is a different matter, and the narrator will tell it truly. They did it of their own accord, after the worlds had risen and the gallery was whole and the long battle was done, and they did it knowing exactly what they were doing, which was the whole of the meaning of it. Diana knelt first, Diana, who had crossed the sea between worlds to weigh a tyrant and sworn never to bow, who had built the rule that no one in this gallery would kneel, who had enforced it at the door against goddesses and apexes alike. She knelt, and she did it with her newly knit arm and her notched spear laid across her palms, and she said, "On the first day I told you I would not kneel, and you said you did not want me to, and we were both right, and we are both about to be wrong on purpose, and that is the only kind of kneeling worth anything, the kind you swore you'd never do, done freely, by someone who could stand back up the instant it stopped being true." And she knelt, the Amazon, and Hela knelt beside her with a flourish that was 3/4 theater and 1/4 the truest thing she had ever done. And Aurora knelt with the quiet dignity of a goddess, who had finally found a court that looked at the woman and not the weather. And Zatanna knelt, and produced from nowhere a single rose, and laid it on the knot ground with the showmanship of a woman who could not help making even devotion into a beautiful trick. And Circe knelt, and made the rose immortal. And the lady at the end of things, restored, knelt last, death itself, kneeling, gladly, to the one being in all of forever who had been glad to see her. And Harry let them? This is the last surprise the narrator has to offer, and it is the most important, because a reader who has followed the King of all things through 7 chapters of refusing the knee might reasonably expect him to refuse it here too, to lift them up, to deliver some final speech about how he wanted equals and not subjects. He did not, he let them kneel. He understood, he had learned it across the whole reign, from the herald's name to the foundations, from Diana's proving to the lady's seam, that there is a kneeling that diminishes and a kneeling that exalts, and that the difference is not in the posture but in the freedom, and that to refuse a freely given knee is its own kind of arrogance, a way of saying I know better than you what your devotion means. These were not broken people who could not stand. They were the most formidable women in all of creation, kneeling because they had chosen to, in a court whose first and only rule had always been that they could leave, and to lift them up would have been to take from them the one thing he had spent the whole story insisting they keep, which was the sovereignty of their own choosing. So he let them kneel, and he knelt too down with them, among them, the King of all things on the knot ground of the house of all things with his court around him. Because the only fit answer to a freely given devotion is a freely given devotion in return, and a king who will not kneel to the people who kneel to him has not understood the first thing about what they were offering. And the 6 of them knelt together in a ring in the center of everything, none above another, the worlds bowing past them to the named foundation at the root of all things, and that not a throne, not a conquest, not a multiverse prostrate before a sovereign was the court of the King of all things, and it was the most beautiful arrangement Circe had ever seen, and she said so and made it last. The narrator could end there, and a tidier story would. But there are accounts to settle, and the narrator has never trusted an ending that does not pay its debts. Voldemort, the narrator should mention, since the audience may wonder, Tom Riddle, the Dark Lord who had hunted a boy across decades and died in a broken chapel on the first day of all this, was never spoken of again by anyone for the rest of the long reign. He had been the largest thing in Harry's small first world, and he had become, against the scale of what Harry grew into, so small that he did not even rate a footnote in the cosmology, a local difficulty resolved before breakfast on the morning the universe changed hands. The narrator mentions him only to mark the distance traveled, that the same hands which had once trembled holding a wand against a single dark wizard had come to hold the loneliest thing in creation and teach it its name, and that this is the truest measure of how far the boy from the cupboard came, not the power which was an accident but the use he made of it, which was a choice every single day, the slow stupid mortal way, the way that could fail and did not. The reign was long and good, and the narrator will not pretend it was without difficulty, because a reign without difficulty is a embalming, and Severano already tried that. There were quarrels in the court. Hela and the lady never did fully reconcile their ancient history, and circled each other for ages, and slowly, grudgingly, across spans that would have worn mountains flat, became something like sisters, which is to say they fought constantly and would have unmade anything that threatened the other. There were worlds that needed tending and griefs that needed witnessing, and the endless patient labor of a sovereign who refused to fix what could be healed and refused to heal what could be merely accompanied. Harry kept saying the words. He kept the small magic of his small first world, casting by hand and by syllable when he could have waved a thought, because forgetting the words was how you became the thing the court was sworn to guard against. And Diana kept her spear keen and never had to use it, and the never having to was the whole point of keeping it keen. And sometimes, in the quiet between the labors, the king of all things would go down to the bottom of the world, the way no one had gone in 10 million years, and the way he went often now. And he would sit in the dawn gray that was learning to be morning, beside the named and quiet foundation of all things, and the two of them would not speak, because they had moved past the need for words to carry their largest meanings, and they would simply keep each other company. The warmth that had stayed and the loneliness that had been met at the root of everything, while above them the layered skies turned and the court quarreled and loved, and the worlds, restored, lived out their small bright clauses in the endless sentence of being. And the universe, which had braced on the first day for a grasping god and a tedious cleanup, looked at the kind one it had got instead, and at the court of freely kneeling goddesses, and at the once loneliest thing in creation finally home, and decided the narrator has it on the best authority, which is the narrator's own judgment, and the narrator has been right about worse, that of all the accidents that had ever befallen it, the boy who kept not dying until he became its king had been, against every reasonable expectation, the very best. Chapter 7 End.